Good morning, guys. Welcome out to Revolution. We're going to continue our eternal responses to TurretinFan. So we're looking at examining TurretinFan's response concerning Revelation 16:5 by Nick Sayers, and this is part 30. So we're still responding to TurretinFan's number 21 video. So we have this one here. And so let's... I think looks like TurretinFan is in the house. And so just first off, I just want to say, look, I apologize to you, TurretinFan. I was saying some things in my last video about Hillsong and blah, blah, blah. But I guess what I was sort of getting at was, I guess I see that what you're doing is, and I did say it pretty clearly, that I felt that it was doublespeak. And in a sense where all the way through I've said, okay, it's the shall be reading. And now you're saying, oh, it's not Beza's reading, which can have two meanings. Either the shall be reading or the whole entire verse, or whichever, the Lord part, or the whole triadic declaration. And so that's where, I felt that Stephen Boyce had gone as well. So you can sort of see why I'm a little bit frustrated with that, because at the end of the day, if I got a tick list and I said, okay, does the Ethiopic have the future form? So yes, it does. Is that Beza's reading in the future form? Yes, it is. It's equivalent to a Somenos. But then to be asked that same question and the answer is, okay, it's not Beza's reading. Then to see that the goalposts have moved to, and I have been pretty clear all the way through these videos that the goalposts are the Somenos. And I'm not against looking at all the other information. And, the more that I look, the more that I'm learning and growing and all the rest of it. But I am quite frustrated by this, because it is, in a sense, to me, it's sort of... it's dodging the main point that and I'm responding to James White saying, okay, shall be is not in the Ethiopic, shall be is not in these manuscripts, shall be, and so we're going through that issue, and that's the main point that I've brought up in my book. And so I think it's got to be made clearer when the question's asked, okay, so does the Ethiopic have that reading? I don't really mind if someone says, does it have Beza's reading, and you're talking to another audience or whatever. But when you're talking about my conclusions and the conclusions of my book, it sort of has to be answered. Yes, it does have the future reading of Beza in the Isomonas part. There are other parts of the verse that aren't matching up to the Ethiopic, and I've never said they do. And if I have, usually it's just because I'm, saying a ream of things, and surely I'm going to get one thing wrong or say it because I'm tired or whatever. That maybe I said the triad declaration is in the Ethiopic, or just got mixed up with something. But I think it has to be made clear that my premise is that it's got the future reading. And so if someone's like, okay, so does Beza have the reading? It's like, yes, he does. But he doesn't have this other reading. And because I think just by saying no, the Ethiopic doesn't have it. No, the Betis doesn't have it. It's not, that's why I'm saying this is a double speak. This is a form of, answering something in a way that's not really accurate. And so TurretinFan said, I will try and make clear the very plain fact that Betis and the Ethiopic use the future tense first. And that's all I'm really asking. Because when it comes down to it, most people have not studied this issue. And even to try and get people up to speed with understanding the Tetragrammaton, understanding I am, understanding these type of things, to get them up to that level takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. and people are looking to your work, and if you're going, well, the Ethiopic doesn't have it, and they're like, well, so is Nick just lying? Or, and people are, I would suggest that people are confused with it. So anyway, we're going to start off at just underneath the 50-minute mark. So we've got about 2 hours and 40 minutes to go in this video. So I think we'll just get straight into it.
We passed it. The New Testament Hebrew of Hutter at Revelation 16:5 is akin to Hava to be. Again, it seems like a throwaway point because Hutter is building his Hebrew on Beza's Greek. So whether or not it...
Now, I did misspeak in my last video. I said that Tremelius had worked on a Hebrew Bible, and he actually, I couldn't find proof of that. I was looking for this Hebrew Bible everywhere, and what it looks like is actually Elias. I got him mixed up with Elias Hutter. So Hutter did the Hebrew New Testament. He was the first one to do so in print. So I guess that's why in my book I've gone to Hutter and not to Tremelius, or else I would have just gone straight to Tremelius. But so I just sort of clear that up.
Seems kind of irrelevant. Most commentaries relate the triadic declaration to Jehovah and Diane. Seems like I don't know the actual survey, but it doesn't really matter whether it's most commentaries or just some commentaries, even some sound commentaries. I don't see it it just seems like a throwaway point. So we could grant it. I don't actually have survey data, but we could just grant it. There's no reason to oppose it. The triadic declaration is a complete name with its own, so that's a typo, I should say it's possessive, not it's, it is. Own Strong's number. So again, this seems like a throwaway point. The fact that it has its own strong number is neither here nor there. So the next claim is that the holy in the manuscripts is a form of nomina sacra. This is kind of a central point.
So I think the issue of it having a Strong's number is very telling, because what this is saying is people who have gone through and they're forming lexicons of the Greek language, they are not treating this word. I'll just get to the Strong. They're not treating this word as if it's just a normal phrase or a normal part of a sentence structure. They're treating it as one whole name. And so that's the only reason I'm pointing that out. Now, I remember James White, when I pointed that out to him, he said, well, anyone who goes to the Strongs, they obviously don't know what they're doing. And the only reason I pointed it out was just to say, look, Spiros od Haetes, which I've showed a few times, and Thea, like all pretty much, it looks like Strong. He is one of the main guys to sort of start this. But Spiros od Haetes, he has the number 3801, and he has 2.5 pages written on this. And he's coming to the same conclusions that people are at Revelation 1:4, that it's a noun phrase, that it is a name, it's a sacred name, okay, which is pretty much the sacred name. I mean, there's not, I can't think, except for the name of Jesus in the New Testament, but the name of Jehovah is the name of God. And so I think this being shown to be that, it's a phrase, and so it's a noun phrase combining G588. I'm pretty sure that's just the definite article with the present participle and imperfect of 1510, and so it goes through all the numbers and everything like that. But clearly, when you read like Spiros od Haetes material, he's saying it's a noun phrase, which is the consensus of most of the older commentaries. And the previous comment about the commentaries, when I'm saying most of them have it, what I'm saying is, like, I know there probably are some that don't. And, I've had lots of commentaries over the years, and some of them are lousy and wouldn't explain things thoroughly. But I think this is a very important thing for people to note, that the vast majority of good commentaries, when you go to Revelation 1:4, they're pretty clear that this is the I am. It is the three parts of the I am: the past, the present, and the future, which is the etymology of Jehovah, which has that three parts: the past, present, and future. And when you equal those parts together, it means the one which is and was and shall be. And they're relating it to the other four triadic declarations as well. So that's very clear. And so I think it is, it's something that I think is the main crux of my argument. And as I've brought up before in the last few days, I'll just try and find this image that I have here. I won't be a sec. Yeah, this one here. Now, I haven't read, I did respond late last night to some of TurretinFan's stuff on Facebook. And I noticed he's written a whole another list of things, and I actually haven't had time to read it. So, but I did note that he said that this etymology goes against the to be etymology, where I would say, no, these make up the to be etymology because it's past, present, and future. These are the building blocks of the to be, which is in Lord. And so the Hebrew language, you've read through my book. I do admit in there that I believe in Edenics. I believe that this is the eternal name of God, that God's name, Jehovah, is his name. That the Hebrew language is a language from the beginning. That's one of the reasons why I believe that the name Jehovah is so specifically important in the book of Revelation, because John was a Hebrew, God was speaking Hebrew, and if this is the original language, the original name, it's of great importance. So we're not just looking at the Greek, we're not just looking at the Latin, but we're seeing the underlying words of Hebrew. And if you do Bible translation, if you just start through the book of Matthew, you won't get far, and you will see so many Hebrew idioms that are in the Greek language that have been brought over. And so but anyway, the etymology of I am, here we have Yeh, he will be, Hova, he is, and Haya, he was. And so these are very important to know. And then we see Jehovah is made up of, it's an archaic third person singular of the imperfective aspect of the verb to be, that is, was, and will be. And so when we have is, was, and will be, that makes up to be, and that's the phonetic etymological structure. See, when we look at Hova, it is he is, which is equivalent to be as well. So we've looked at that. We've looked at the Haya being part of that, the Yeh as well. And so it's very interesting to go through the etymology of I am, Jehovah, and see that type of relationship with the triadic declaration in Revelation 16:5. And so to me, this is the main point that I'm trying to bring out. And, Adam Clark talks about this, the rabbis say, I am that I am, and it's the past, present, future. They say Jehovah, that's the past, present, future. And they both equal, basically what Revelation 16:5 is saying. So it's not hard to go, even just reading through this particular scripture here. It says, this is my name forever. this is my memorial unto all generations. And so, I was listening back through the first part of the video, that the response video that TurretinFan had done of my book. And so I went back through that a little bit yesterday, and I noticed that when TurretinFan was talking about Jehovah, he was saying the most holy name of God, which is exactly what I've said all the way through, because it's just common. Oh, Jehovah's the most holy name of God, because it was talking a lot about Yahweh and this and that, and, all different types of things. And it was like, well, this is the most holy name of God. And it's like, but then somewhere along the line, I guess because I've written it in my book, it's like, well, why doesn't it keep saying this is the most holy name of God? Well, it's because of scriptures like this. And, I do believe that Jehovah is part of the etymology of Jesus. Jehovah is salvation. I believe Jesus is Jehovah, but Yehoshua, he is our savior. And so Yehoshua. So I think going through the Hebrew etymology, it's not just like English etymology where we have the word cat related to some sort of phonetic sound or a noise, or just back to a Greek word or a Latin word or whatever. This is the Hebrew language is a lot more colorful when it comes to etymology, and it has a lot of meaning. And so TurretinFan says, why ye instead of ye for the first part? I guess it's just the way, it's probably just modern Hebrew pronunciation. That's probably the issue. It's like say with Hova, I do try to make that distinction because there is and so I might say Hava, Haya, and then I might say Hova in other places. Usually in each context, I'm trying to bring across a certain aspect of that word and a certain phonetic way of saying it. Like I mentioned before, we say anachronism. I might say an anachronism, so people know, it's an ana against a chronos is time. So I'm saying Hova because most people have no idea that Jehovah, that the Hova is the being. It means to be. And so whenever you're learning a language, Spanish, French, Italian, you get the Pimsleur's thing, and they'll usually get you to learn to be, or I am tired, I am, and so these things are like elementary building blocks of any type of language. And so, but the thing is, for this to be relative in people's minds that it's related to Hova, it's like a Hava. I might say Hava at certain stages because that's how you say it, but then I might say Hova. And it also just depends on the way that the Hebrew sounded, because you've got Ashkenazi Hebrew, you got Sephardic Hebrew, you got Yemenite Hebrew, you got pure temple Hebrew, you've got street Hebrew, you've got what would be considered biblical Hebrew. And so all of these have different pronunciations. All of these have different ways of writing the letters. Even people I guess it's like in Europe there is a general sort of gist of an alphabet, but you can go to Poland and you got dots above letters and you got all sorts of things, and you're like, well, what's that? And so because the Jews were spread about, Yiddish came into the language as well. There is a lot of variation, and so but I think you do get what I'm saying here. I'd love to tidy this pronunciation all up and make it all absolutely kosher to to Jewish speaking people. But at the end of the day, I think for our purposes and what we're doing, looking at the etymology of I am and Jehovah, I think it's sufficient. TurretinFan's said, and similar question about the third part, why the end of the word and not the beginning? Oh yeah, that's because you have so you have the beginning here, then you have the middle here, and then you have the ending here. And so this is sort of, and when I'm saying in my book, like it's elementary to Hebraeus, I'll get a video of this. Okay, so and so Nehemiah Gordon, now he has recently become a bit of a or he's become accepted by the Academy, which is quite amazing, because if you look at his videos, and so this is where I guess I would encourage TurretinFan to go. He does a whole video on Yahweh and the roots to Jupiter. He talks about 1,000 manuscripts of the name Jehovah in it. Now I got my understanding from Scott Jones and from other things, but people like Stephen Avery, he must have gotten his ideas on Yahweh through Nehemiah Gordon. And so because I do say in my book, like this is from Stephen Avery's research, because he was putting it on his site. But when you go through, say, some of the playlists, I'll try and find a video that's not too long. Okay. Okay, the name of God. Okay, so this is a so this is a playlist. Looks like a lot of it. It looks like it goes for a long time. But let's say we'll look at this one. Because sometimes he does pull up a chart. Nehemiah speaks fluent Hebrew. Now, he's not a King James guy. He does say that the King James doesn't translate this properly and blah, blah, blah. Now, just last week, he was part of the SBL, Society of Biblical Literature, and he was part of the crew that went to the Vatican to test the ink of the dots that are next to a lot of the Byzantine readings or the missing Byzantine readings in Vaticanus, because someone went through and marked up Vaticanus with dots. And so some people were saying, well, is this the original ink and all this sort of stuff? So it's only, some of this is just coming out. I've only read a little bit about it. Stephen Coulson, he was one of the main guys instrumental in exposing archaic mark as a forgery. So he's an Australian guy. Actually, he might be American, but he's living in Australia, in Melbourne. And so I follow him on Twitter. But he has some interesting things to say. And so Nehemiah Gordon has jumped into the Academy, but he's bringing all his Hebrew stuff with him, including the name of Jehovah. And so this will become probably a hotly contested thing. And I think Yahweh will just fade into obscurity, because at the end of the day, I just can't see any way around this, because Gesenius clearly said that he felt that it was from Jupiter and popularized that type of notion. And then Yahweh has just become a very popular name. And so, I was in a church where they had songs, Yahweh, Yahweh, people would sing it. But I did discover through Scott Jones's article back in like 2002, I read that and I was like, oh, it's the name of Jehovah. So I've known that for quite a long time. And I guess I've thought along those lines for quite a long time. But,
Shalom, this is...
and I guess that's why, I've written my book. So... Yeah, it doesn't look like that's got many pictures on it. So maybe if I type in Eli Gordon, I am and Jehovah. Yeah, I think it might be this one here. As
Nehemiah, I have a
yeah,
question
here.
Yeah. How?
So this one goes for 6 minutes. So TurretinFan's says it would be fun if they do the same with the Ink of Sinaiticus. I think that's inevitable. I think there's enough contra argumentation about Sinaiticus that people are saying, well, they actually did go to test it, Sinaiticus. The team showed up to test it, and they got turned away for some reason. It was Stephen Avery knows quite a lot about that, and so they went there to chemically test it, and for some reason that it was, whether they stopped doing it or whether they were turned away. I can't remember exactly what happened, but so it's interesting that at least these type of things. See, because there's such a stigma against Textus Receptus and King James only sort of stuff, it's usually people like Maurice Robinson, James Snap Jr., these guys who are still respected as scholars in the academy. They can say, oh, what about the Byzantine readings in Vaticanus? And they can bring these things up, and it can become a scholarly discussion. Where if it was just like 1 John 5:7, people probably wouldn't bother. They would say, oh, well, we all know, there's a consensus that isn't worth looking at. So just shut the door to that information. But because you got a Byzantine crew, you got majority text crew, and a lot of these guys, Pickering and others, they're looking into manuscripts, and so they're raising their voice, and so I think that's what's been a push behind this. But Nehemiah Gordon, he's like the sort of guy who collects manuscripts. I think he had 20. Sorry, not collects manuscripts, but studies manuscripts. Being in Jerusalem, going to the libraries there, looking at all the Hebrew documentation from, say, the Book of Matthew and reading through it, or even just going through, say, looking for the name of Jehovah in these 1,000 manuscripts. What he's found is what they would do is actually write the manuscript and not put the name of Jehovah in any place, and then come back later and spend days and days just writing the name of Jehovah through it. And so he's sort of got it down to a science of what about Jehovah and things like that. So anyway, I think what I'll do, I'll play this 6-minute video. I won't stop it, and then I'll go back and I'll look at he brings up the theophoric names and things like that. So let's just go through it.
Is hallelujah related to the name?
That's a really good question, Michael. I get that a lot. People say, well, if it's Yehovah with an N in the beginning, why isn't it hallelujah? And then we have all these names that end in Yah. For example, my name, Nehemiah. And there's, Eliyahu is Elijah. Why isn't it Eliyah, Nehemiah? Okay, great question. This question was answered by a rabbi in 1834 named Samuel David Luzzatto. And what he explains is actually something every Jew learns in kindergarten. He's explaining this to the German scholar Gesenius, who probably did know it, but was ignoring what he knew. And the rule is that when you have a long vowel in the accented syllable in Hebrew, that becomes a short vowel called shva, or a semivowel, when it's not in the accented syllable. In other words, the pronunciation of the word changes based on where the emphasis is in the word.
Okay.
And so here's what Samuel David Luzzatto wrote in 1834. He says the kamatz of Yah, that's the name of the vowel there, kamatz, changes to shva when the word is elongated. So an example of that would be the Hebrew word gadol, which means big. When you add a suffix to that, it's gedolim, not gadolim, right? It's just like Yah becomes yeah. Same exact thing happening. Same vowel, actually, same vowel shift. And then he says the proof is Yehonatan and his friends. It's a great statement, very poetic. But what does he mean? Every name where Yud, Hey, Vav appears at the beginning of the name, it's always Yeho. And nobody disputes that in the history of the Jewish people, because there's never been a ban on speaking those names. Let me read you some of those names.
Okay.
Yehoachaz, Yehoash. It's not Yahoash, Yahoachaz. That's made up Hebrew from people who don't know what they're talking about. It's Yehozavad, Yehochanan, Yehoyada. And you see those names in English, like in the name like Jonathan, which is Yehonatan, right? They dropped the H there because of what's happening in Greek. Greek doesn't have an H. There's 20 names that begin Yeho, approximately 20 names. There are many names that end in Yahu. Now, in the Father's name, is the Yud He Vav at the beginning of his name or the end of his name? It's at the beginning. And more importantly, where's the emphasis of the word? The emphasis of the word is in the final syllable. It's marked that way in all Hebrew manuscripts with vowels. No question about it. All the Hebrew manuscripts with vowels mark it as Yehovah. And what happens because of that is the kamat of Yah, with Yah is always the emphasized syllable. It's hallelujah. That then shifts to a shva, or vice versa. You could look at it both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You have this relationship between shva and kamatz, between e and a, based on the emphasis of the syllable. Now, Yah appears in the Tanakh 49 times as a poetic form of God's name. It appears in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, 4 times. People don't realize that, but it's in the phrase hallelujah, which is actually 2 words that mean praise Yah. I do want to show something, Michael, about the relationship between Yah and Yahweh. Can I show that, Michael?
Oh, yes,
It's,
certainly.
People say, well, surely it should be Yahweh because it's hallelujah. What they're not telling you is they're kind of pulling a fast one. What you could see in the word Yah is that it has the vowel called kamatz. It's like a little T. That Yah is different than the Yah in Yahweh. Now, here's the really interesting, Michael. When I created this graphic, I wanted to verify that what I was saying was right. So I looked up in my printed Bible, and it had the kamatz, the little T. And the one in Yahweh is a single line, right? And then I looked up in the Aleppo Codex, and I found the little T, the kamatz, underneath the first letter. And then I looked up in the Leningrad Codex, and I found the little T, the kamatz. Every manuscript that I could find has hallelujah with the little T, the kamatz. And then I said, how do I know Yahweh has this other vowel that's a single line called patach? How do I know that? I need to look that up in a manuscript. There weren't any Hebrew manuscripts to look it up in. It doesn't exist in Hebrew manuscripts. So where did I have to look it up? I had to look it up in Gesenius's Hebrew Grammar and Gesenius's Lexicon from the 1830s. And I had to look it up in Brown Driver Briggs' Hebrew and English lexicon from the 20th century, and the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament from the 20th century. I couldn't find it in any Hebrew Jewish sources. I could only find it in English and German sources. And that's really interesting. And what happens here is you can see Yah has a vowel, a little T, and that's pronounced ah. And then the Yahweh has a little vowel called the patach, which is also pronounced Yah, an ah. However, those ahs are different, right? You think they're the same in English, but they're not. There's no question whatsoever that those 2 vowels had a different pronunciation. And so the Yah of hallelujah is different than the Yah in Yahweh. In fact, in English churches, they pronounce the Yah of hallelujah correctly. They don't say hallelujah. They say hallelujah. And think of the vowel in Yah, the Yah of hallelujah. That actually is the kamatz that is the pronunciation of that vowel, kamatz. And that vowel is different than the vowel in Yahweh. And so when people are saying, oh, it's Yahweh because hallelujah, they're pulling a fast one. They're hoping that people don't know that it's 2 different vowels in Hebrew. And to be honest, they probably don't know themselves. Same thing with, you say Yahshua. Yahshua, well, which vowel is that, a kamatz or a patach? You can't have a kamatz there because that's a long vowel. You can't have that so far away from the emphasized syllable. How do I know where this emphasized syllable is in Yeshua? Well, because it can only be the final or second to last syllable. It's only the possibilities in Hebrew. You can't have Yahoshua or Yahshua. It has to be Yehoshua. It becomes what's called a truncated vowel or a pretonal shortening, to give a technical linguistic term. So there's clearly a difference in the Hebrew language when you read it in Hebrew between the Yah and hallelujah and the Yah of Yahweh, and the hallelujah, that Yah naturally turns into an eh at the beginning of a word like Yehovah, Yehoshua, Yehonatan. That's what this rabbi in 1834 means when he says Jonathan and his friends.
You have been listening to...
Okay, so it didn't really touch on the I am Jehovah thing. So sorry about that. I thought it, because I have watched through just recently through a few of these videos, and I saw that one, but it was actually this one that I should probably point out. Now this goes for 5 minutes. So
here's what's important. When I look at Yud He Vav He and I see before that in the verse Ehyeh, I immediately notice, wait a minute, something's going on here. Yud He Vav He sounds awfully like Ehyeh. Clearly it has some relation to the word Hayah. And the Aleph is I will, and the Yud means he will. So God says to Moses, I will be that which I will be, or I am that which I am. And he says, tell them I am sent me to you. And then, or I will be sent me to you. And then very next verse, before he's caught his breath, so to speak, he says moreover to Moses, Yud He Vav He. So when you read this in Hebrew, it's immediately obvious that Yud of Yud He Vav He is the Yud of Yehyeh, he will be. Are you with me, guys? This is immediately obvious in Hebrew. This is not some innovation I came up with. I'll show you there's sources going back 2,000 years that say this. It's so obvious, I don't know that I've ever taught this. This is the part where I said, why would I do a teaching on Exodus 3:14? Like you want me to talk about bringing evidence that the sky is blue? Like it just seems to me like, but I realize most people don't speak Hebrew and don't know Hebrew grammar. So in Hebrew, this is obvious. Now there's a little bit of a problem here. If really these two are related, Ehyeh and Yehyeh, why isn't it named Yud He Vav He? Why isn't it Yud He Yud He? Where did the Vav come from? That's pretty obvious too. The Vav comes from, so we've got Yehyeh and Yud He Vav He. You see the difference is the Yud versus the Vav. So where did the Vav come from? The Vav comes from the present tense form of the verb. Hoveh means he who is, or he is. Everybody say Hoveh. And by the way, Hovah, say Hovah, means she is. Okay, Hoveh, Hovah, Hovim, Hovot. He is, she is, they are, they are. Hebrew is a very politically incorrect language. There's a different form for masculine and feminine. They, meaning in English you have they, in Hebrew there's two theys, they, he, and they, she. Do you want to hear how politically incorrect Hebrew is? If there's 1,000 women in the crowd and one man, you refer to them as masculine. It's like the one drop rule of the Hebrew language. If there's 1,000 men and one woman, you still refer to them as masculine, right? So now you could actually, if you want to be politically correct, argue that the masculine is technically a neuter form as well, right? But let's not get into that. So we've got Hoveh and Yehyeh. And maybe we should stop here, but we can't stop here because we heard the rabbi say, Hayah Hoveh Yehyeh. He was, he is, he will be, or he who was, he who is, he who will be. Where did he get the Hayah? Why did he bring that in there? We don't need that, right? We've got the Vav of Hoveh, and we've got the Yud of Yehyeh. Why did he bring that in there? Hayah means he who was. Everybody with me? Hayah, Hoveh, Yehyeh. Here's the really cool part that I thought was too obvious to bother to talk about. I really thought this was obvious, but it was funny. I was sharing this with T-Bone. T-Bone is this gentleman who doesn't read Hebrew, but he has some kind of incredible program. He's a computer programmer mind, and he could look at a manuscript of Hebrew and immediately find on the page where it says Yehovah with the full vowels. Incredible. So I was explaining this to T-Bone a few days ago, and he said, Nechem, and this is a guy who's found the name Yehovah in over 700, personally, he's actually found it personally. I mean, I verified it, right? But he found it personally in over 700 manuscripts, which is more than me. I've got about 200 and change to my name, where I am the first one to have found it in those manuscripts, but he found it in over 700. Incredible, this man. And I'm showing this to him, what's obvious to me, and he said, for all these months I've been working with you, and I knew there was a piece missing to the puzzle. And I was praying, God, I don't understand. How do you get from Hayah Hoveh to Yehyeh to Yehovah? And of course, why would I explain it to him? It's obvious. Yehovah. The Yud of Yehyeh and the Ho of Hoveh and the Av Hayah is Yehovah. This is obvious in Hebrew. I'm telling you, the sky is blue. I don't need the 1,000 manuscripts. I love the 1,000 manuscripts, but I actually don't need them to know it's Yehovah. They verify 100% that it's Yehovah without any question, any doubt. But this is something that was known to Jews based on the Hebrew grammar alone. Haya, Hoveh, Yehieh. Let's look at that one more time. Haya, Hoveh, Yehieh is Yehovah. Is that pretty cool? All right. I hope you enjoyed the special preview of my support team study, The Great I Am Revealed. If you're interested in watching the full in-depth teaching, simply visit my website, nehemiahswall.com.
Okay. So I've just started going through Nehemiah's material probably in the last few weeks, because I guess the study that we're doing here is becoming more and more in-depth and getting into the Hebrew and things like that. And in the book, when I talk about Hata, so I'll just quickly grab the Hata text here. So when we talk about Hata and his the Triadic Declaration at Revelation 16:5. Sorry, I'll just turn that page sound off. I'll just go to the book of Revelation, chapter 11, chapter 12, a little bit further. This is an amazing book, this Hutter's Polyglot, the 12-language polyglot. And so he had done his Hebrew edition, and that's what's in here as well. So, okay, so that's Revelation 15, 16, 5, there. Okay, so let's expand that. And so I showed this in the last video as well, where you have ekomenos in the Greek. So he's actually going with the reading of Erasmus, which is quite interesting. But when we look at what Nehemiah Gordon was saying, so here we have Yehovah, and so that is what the word Lord, and so Yehovah Asher, and then it has Haya. And so usually how you read the Hebrew letters is you actually go from like the top down and you collect the vowel as you go down. Then you slip up and then you go down again to the next one. Then you slip up and you go down. So you sort of read it like this. That's how I learned when I was learning Hebrew probably 20 years ago now. I've forgotten most of it. But so you go, so that was that a patak or a kamatz? I think it was a kamatz. And so you got a ha-ya, and with a on the end. So ha-ya. And so then so with Jehovah you have ya, so it's yeah, and then ho, that dot there is the O, like the holum, and then it's like a V, va, with a H on the end, va, like that. So it's ya, and then it's ho, and that one goes ho, and it collects the O as it goes up, and it's va, like va, like that. So I'm probably doing a poor example with my little mouse here, but so this has Asher here, but then it has the ho, and then va, or hoveh, however you're pronouncing it. I'm not exactly 100% sure of the exact pronunciation, but I know that's a ho, va. So that would be the haya, the hova, and this is a yeah. So it's a yod, a hay, a yod, and a hay. It's yeah. And so that's what we seem to have here. I'll just make that a little bit higher. So we have will be the yeah is that one. So this is just Asher. Now in the book, what I did is I got rid, or I put a separation between letters that just make it like the word and. It's just a conjunction, so it's basically and, the one who was and is and. But so the Asher is important there, but yeah, so don't let that confuse you. But so we have the Haya there, which is this one here, who was the Haya, and it's pretty much exactly with the two similar vowel points. Then we have the Hova here, which is he is, and then we have the Yiye will be. And so that's one, like you think this is 1599, the Hebrew here, and so it's quite interesting. And so anyone reading Hebrew would go verse 5. See this verse here, I am that I am, and being the etymology of Jehovah, and saying that Jehovah's name is the most important name. This would have been elementary to any Hebrew. This is sort of like stuff that some of the first things they learn, and then for them to go through Revelation 16 verse 5 and go, and it talks about the angel of the water said, righteous are you, O Jehovah, and then it's basically saying who was and is and shall be. So that looks like the order of it, but I'm not concrete on that, but it does look like that's the order of it. The holum seems to be missing the little dot on there, but it might just be because it's hard to get Hebrew to come out properly in a text. But so I think just going back to what we're talking about, this is all very interesting, but that's why it's like, okay, in us who mostly look at Greek, and we can understand Greek because it's a Indo-European language and we're familiar with it. The Hebrew, you have to read it backwards. It's Semitic, like my wife, I can put Arabic on the screen and she can go, oh yeah, well this is the word for heaven and this is the word for this, and I'm reading the English on the side going, yep, she got that right, and so she can read the Arabic lettering. And sometimes she could sound it all out in Arabic, but she mightn't know what some of the words mean. And so, but some of the words are the same because of the Muslim influence onto Urdu. And so she reads the Urdu script. Yes, she's fluent in that. She reads her Bible in Urdu and things. So, but anyway, I just sort of mentioned that the Strong's number is quite an important thing. It does relate to the whole thing being a noun phrase, and not just a noun phrase, the noun phrase of I am, Jehovah, has the etymology there, has the past, present, and future. So this is what I can't get around. If it's going to say the name, it would say the past, the present, and future. And to me, this is the holiest name of God. According to the Jews, the Jews were going around in their mind like Jehovah. They were constantly thinking about this, specifically scribes who were copying things, and to me, to think that a scribe put holy there to indicate that this is the holiest name of God in the whole Bible, but it's just mentioned in some random verse in the book of Revelation. To me, that's not out of the realm of impossibilities, and to me that explains the other readings. And so and also I can't, now that I've seen it, I can't really unsee it. I look for alternatives in my mind, but I just can't see. Like, to me, I'm just as convinced as if someone just saw in Matthew 1:1. If we go to Matthew 1:1, if we saw an nomina sacra there, I'll just throw up my website here. So if we saw some of these manuscripts, so say some of these manuscripts here, I don't go through when it's got these other Greeks. So that's Papyrus 1, Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Codex Washingtonianus, So it's a whole bunch of manuscripts. But notice Nomina Sacra, all the way through. I mean, it's hard to find one of that age that isn't Nomina Sacra. So it's really until the age of printing, the Nomina Sacra is expanded. So this is what I think Beza did. I don't think he did anything that was really controversial. I mean, his friend Tremellius, he was a Jew. He knew these languages. He would have, and so that's what I'm doing now. Is I'm going through. I'm realizing that on my website I have hardly any information about I am. I might have a little bit about Jehovah, but I am and all this stuff that sort of Nehemiah Gordon's talking about. It's like, okay, well, I'll go into all that, and now I'm looking at it in the Hebrew. I'm like, to me, it's just more and more convincing all the time. So someone recognizing a Nomina Sacra here, that's where I look at Holy and go, it's a Nomina Sacra. I can't get around that. This is the name of God. This is, and even this verse here, where we get this from, it says, and the Lord said to Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shall you say unto the children of Israel, I am, hath sent me unto you. And the Lord said moreover unto Moses, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me unto you, and this is my name forever. So it's not the name of I am, but that's the etymology of Lord here. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. So even just reading through that, it would be interesting to go to the historical narrative and see what Moses said to the children of Israel. Okay, this is the name of God, or whatever, or whether he did say that. Yeah, so that'll be interesting. But so I think I've sort of exhausted that point. But let's just continue.
This is one that we haven't seen any good evidence for. I don't know a nice way to put it. There's not any reason to accept this assertion. It's just an assertion. It would be nice if there were a reason to accept this assertion. And I think it would probably be very essential to a second edition of this book to provide something to document this assertion. There's nothing that I've seen from what Nick has provided to move me to think that the holy in the manuscripts is a form of Nomina Sacra. And it's very essential to Nick's argument. So,
well, if and I guess too, this is probably going to be one of those things where I would just encourage TurretinFan to go through and look at the Hebrew Old Testament way that they talked about Jehovah. And so again, the Nehemiah's stuff, I'm not going to play this. I'll turn the sound. Well, actually, I'll just stop it. But so he looks at these 1,000 manuscripts with Jehovah in it, and he explains that there is one video there where what he does is he shows how they wrote it, the rules to writing Jehovah, and so it's definitely the sacred name. Okay, and so I think this is the thing. I would say to TurretinFan, you would have to acknowledge that the past, present, and future of Revelation 16:5, as it stands, in the King James and the Textus Receptus, if that is a true reading, then that would be equivalent to I am and Jehovah, as mentioned. So that would be something that would be like, okay, we would admit that if it's a true reading in Revelation 16:5, okay. And then you would have to go, okay, how did they treat the name of Jehovah in the Old Testament? And so that's where guys like this come in. And I was reading a lot of Stephen Avery's material, but it seems like he has gone through a lot of this stuff and gleaned some points. But at the end of the day, I really do feel that this needs to be known more. And like I was saying, they used to get the manuscripts and they wouldn't write the name of Jehovah down. They would write the name of Well, what he points out is in some manuscripts, they actually would put Elohim later as well, and then Adonai, and then Hashem, and all these other things. But he says it's primarily Jehovah. That's what. And he can tell that because you have sort of large writing, and then it'll be Jehovah, and it's a little bit smaller. And he said you can just notice it. You'll just be reading along, and it might have a bigger space because they've left it for the name, but you can't, I guess maybe they had a ruler or something, and they're like, well, it's going to be about that big, but I guess some people mightn't have done that. They just sort of skipped over it and they've left it. And sometimes it's squished together to fit it in. So he said, clearly they were writing this later. And then he goes through all the rules of, even if the king comes in when you're writing the names of Jehovah back in these manuscripts, you have to, go. You can't even talk to a king. You have to go wash. Some people, if they were unclean or they had bad thoughts or whatever, they couldn't do this. And so there was all these rules that were part of the Masoretic tradition. But and so to me, none of this grates against anything that I'm thinking of or saying. And Nehemiah Gordon, he tends to say that the Triadic declarations in the Book of Revelation. Now, I don't think he's gone specifically to Revelation 16:5. He has mentioned Revelation 16:5, but he hasn't mentioned that it's sort of like Textus Receptus, critical text, or whatever. So it would be interesting to get his take on it. I would really like to pick his brains because I know so much about this issue. It's great to find someone who is, I guess, in a sense, more advanced in, like, say, the name of Jehovah and all this. And he's got videos about Yahweh that I agree with, and I've gone through that material because, I'm not quick to jump into the whole, it's a pagan thing. I specifically bought that book, Pagan Christianity, to debunk it because so many people were saying, yeah, everything's pagan, Christmas is pagan, Easter's pagan, you just existing is pagan, and so in my Easter article I was like, well, I don't think that Easter is pagan. And that was one of the things that became sort of widely accepted because back in 2005 when I wrote the article, everyone thought Easter was pagan. Not everyone, but it was just if you went to any church, they would say, oh, Easter's pagan. But us Christians, we've remodeled it, And so I'm very careful to just say, well, this is a pagan thing. And so, but when I went through the Yahweh information, I was like, I can't get around that. And I do have in my book, the spelling of Yahweh, and it's pretty much just from Gesenius. Gesenius writes about it. Tregellus debunked him in that, and had scholars listened to Tregellus back then, they wouldn't have gone with that reading, but they have gone with that reading. And as Nehemiah said, it's in none of the manuscripts. So this is one of the things. It's like, okay, well, the reading of Asomenos, it's in none of the manuscripts, okay, but the name Jehovah is in all of the manuscripts, wherever the name of the Lord is, but Yahweh's in none of them, in 0 of them. And so that, if we're looking at manuscript evidence for the proof of a name of Yahweh, it's non-existent. And these guys are looking for it. They're scouring manuscripts in museums, in libraries, in Jerusalem, going through all this stuff. And so, to me, this is just more attestation to what I've said. And, so hopefully you can see that. But, I would just go through. Anyway, I won't open up another video. But, there's a lot of information. And also, I would go through some of the surrounding information. I've watched a few videos that sort of come up on the sidebar, and they're quite interesting. People just talking about Jehovah and people talking about different aspects of it, because I guess Nehemiah has quite a big following nowadays. and he seems like a very nice guy. You know, like when I listen to him, I don't get, even though he's not a King James guy, I don't get from him that he's really, you know, got a religious type of spirit, or he's angry, or, you know, he's going to slap you over the head, or, you know, just call you a moron, or whatever. He seems like he's just trying to search for truth, you know. So now I had watched some videos that were against Nehemiah Gordon. I can't really remember. There was some sort of thing where he was saying where he had, I think God spoke to him or something in a plane and talked to him about the name of God and not something to do with 9/11 or something. And I was just like, no, I don't know about that, you know. So I'm not sure about all that. I'm going to go through all of this guy's material, and I guess that will come out. But, you know, I guess, yeah, even, you know, some critical text guys say some strange things here and there. Like, say, Tommy Wasserman, he doesn't believe in a literal burning hell. He said that to Bart Ehrman. But I can still go through his collations of Jude and go, okay, well, he's collated all the manuscripts of Jude, just like Hoskia did of Revelation. And I can go, yeah, well, that's interesting information. I'm glad you've done it, you know. And so that's how I'm looking at this guy. I'm not going to, you know, put a poster of him on my wall and say, well, Nehemiah's the guru. And in fact, you know, I've sort of come at this information from a different angle. And so, but anyway, let's continue.
To me, that's a really glaring problem. You can go back over that. You can hear the points that he's raised. I've gone through the arguments that he's presented. I don't know what to say. That's a really glaring problem. The next, he says the Triadic Declaration is the original sacred name. I think this wording is confused on the basis of nomina sacra is a technical term for a form of abbreviation. It's a technical term that arose later, arose in the 1800s, as a name for the kind of abbreviation that took place in the patristic and period and beyond, in terms of abbreviating certain names using an overstroke. That technique is not present in most Greek manuscripts, and in the ones that have the word Lord, which do have this overstroke. They just have it over the word Lord, not over the entire phrase or anything like that. So that kind of overstroking isn't present. Secondly, when he says it's the original sacred name, it's not the first name that God gives for himself in Scripture. If you remember, it's, and God said that there be light. It's Elohim there. It is the name that God told Moses about, and that Moses included in Genesis, including before that point where God revealed it to Moses. But to say that it's the original sacred name it seems like a throwaway claim. P47 has the and that Beza pointed to, which was going to fulfill the triad. So this just seems to be...
So I think the whole thing, its original sacred name, I mean, if you were to say, like when I studied Hebrew, the first lesson that we had, there was like 20 people who, someone just put, learn ancient Hebrew on poles around town. So I thought, this is great. So I went to their first meeting. There was about 20, 25 people there. And we all were talking about Hebrew. And the Tetragrammaton was just the main part of that discussion. And so the main guy there, I ended up, we were having like personal tutorials. So I was paying him basically to teach me Hebrew. So he was an Anglican scholar. And so he, eventually everyone else dropped off and it was only me doing it. But the Tetragrammaton was like, everyone wanted to know about that. It was the main thing. And to me, you know, like if I was to say to someone, what's what's the holiest name of God in the Bible? I mean, people will probably say Jesus, but then it's like, well, actually, the Bible does say Jehovah. It's just a well-known common fact. It's not, to me, it's not something controversial or something that we would question. And I think the thing is too, like, most people who I'm telling about this issue, they think the name of God is Yahweh. Many times they don't know that it's related to to exist or to be, and then showing them that it's related to I am. So this sort of stuff is, if you're learning Hebrew, it's very elementary, but to get up to that level, it can take quite a bit. But someone who already knows all that, it's just like, okay, well, now we can just deal with, let's look at this and let's look at that and look at other things. And so that's why I'm mentioning it in my list of bullet points. It's like, well, the name is a noun phrase. The name has its own Strong's number. The name has, so I'm just sort of building the case that really, if I was among Hebrew scholars, I wouldn't have to mention it, hardly any of this, because it's just elementary to them. And I didn't know a lot of this. I had to learn all this stuff. And so I'm like, okay, what didn't I know? So, well, I didn't really know the name of God was related to being, I sort of knew through I am and, I exist and all this sort of stuff. But it's more, it's deeper. It's related to Jehovah, I am, etc.
Premised on a misreading of Beza. Beza's contention about corruption here is not about the and. His point about corruption here is about the article, not the and, as far as I can see.
I think, well, he is talking also about the Vulgate there, about the Latin. And I think, well, what he's saying is that the definite article, it's problematic because you do have the conjunction there. And so, and to link dikaios, righteous, to holy, which is what most of the Bibles tend to do, the modern Bibles tend to do that as well, then you've got an issue there because of the Greek construction. So it's modifying the and there. So it's like, what's the and there for? Well, if you've got a definite article there, the and is being modified in a certain direction.
Now, maybe Nick has a point here that he's going to raise in response, but the and is present in some Greek manuscripts, and it's not present in other Greek manuscripts. But the question there is whether it's you are righteous and holy because you've judged us, or whether it's you are righteous, O Holy One, because you've judged us. And either way is acceptable in its meaning, but it is important to know which is which. But it doesn't address the substitution that Beza is pointing to. At least that's my take. Now, maybe there's some other way to interpret what Beza says. I'll look forward to that point. Jerome has shalt be in the triadic declaration. This basically is just not correct.
So when I was writing my book, I'm looking at Beatus of Libana, which is the Latin, which has the reading in it of the future form. Doesn't have all the other bells and whistles, but it has the future form there. So to me, this was a clear indication that it was in previous editions of the Latin. It is a witness of the Latin. And also with Wordsworth saying that there were manuscripts with the past, present, and the future form, which equaled shall be. And he doesn't specifically name the manuscripts, but he does say that reading is there in Revelation, which is the reading of Revelation 16:5. I think with those two, and also Homo Halberstadensis commenting on that type of thing, and saying formally it was the past, the present, and the future. I think that's where, because, I've gone through, I'm going through the critique of my book and looking at it going, yeah, well, I am saying that the Latin has it, but it's not like, here's a picture of the Ethiopic there you go, let's deal with that. Or here's Beatus of Libana, here you go, deal with that. It's sort of like a culmination of several things. And I guess it comes down to the statements of Wordsworth. It comes down to Hamo and Beatus and their information and the conclusions of it existing in the Latin there. And so, but it's not, the strongest evidence. And I think even in a way I've gone through sometimes listing things and well, the Latin, I'd probably have to, explain that more or extrapolate or tell people how I got to that conclusion a little bit more rather than just having all Wordsworth said this. I guess in a way, when I'm writing the book, I've come to those conclusions and I'm thinking, well, other people will come to those conclusions too, where people probably want more. And so I'm looking more and more into different things. And so that will be another thing that I will look into is, Latin manuscripts. Nehemiah's looking into a whole bunch of Hebrew manuscripts, which is quite interesting. It'd be interesting to see if he's looking into the Hebrew manuscripts of Book of Revelation and how he would treat these triadic declarations and what he would say about them, and whether he would come to the same conclusion of it's a sacred name, it's got nomina sacra, it's got the holy over it. And so that'll be interesting.
I don't know how else nicely to put this. To say that Jerome has it in the triadic declaration is misleading at best, and we've already talked about it before. Clement of Alexandria, speaking of Jehovah, used esomenos, and then he adds, knowing the correct New Testament reading of Revelation 16:5. This is just assertion. There's not. Clement of Alexandria does use the word esomenos, and he does use it of the Lord, but to say that he was referencing Revelation 16:5 is just speculation.
Well, I think the thing is he's referencing Christ, and he's saying he is the esomenos, which is the shall be, which is the final part of the etymology of Jehovah and I am. So as I've mentioned, some things are alluding to Jehovah, some to I am, some to Revelation 16:5. But I mean, nowhere else in the Greek is God called the esomenos. And so I guess it's a bit like saying, if we were looking at the words oikonomia or koinonia, if we were looking at those, if the word koinonia only appeared in Ephesians 3:9, and we saw that God was called the God of the koinonia, so he's referencing that one. I guess esomenos is it. We should really classify it as a hapex legomenon in the Textus Receptus corpus, because it is esomenos doesn't really appear in that specific form. Now, I'm pretty sure esomenon does quite frequently in the Gospels, specifically when it's talking about Jesus talking about he is to come. When John the Baptist, he said, do we look for another? Are you the one who is to come, or do we look for another? And so that I'm pretty sure that's esomenon. I don't think it's erchomenon. So anyway, I've got to look into that. But I'm pretty sure it's just the different inflected forms. But if I'm wrong on that esomenos could be a hapex legomenon there, which is just a word that appears once, which would be a very... It's interesting to study words from that perspective, because knowing that a word just appears once, you look at it differently, you think about it differently, you treat it like a special case sort of thing. And that would be another reason why you would go outside of, say, the closed class of witnesses and look at outside of that into other languages and things like that, because it's a hapex legomenon. So say of being challenged on hapex legomenon readings, what I think people have done, they've gone through the hapex legomenon readings in Hebrew, made a list of them, and gone, the King James is wrong on all of these. Because when I'm dealing with people on the internet, usually they're like, oh, Isaiah chapter 5, this word here is wrong. And so you go to study it, and it's like, oh, it appears once just there. But it's always a hopeless legomenon. It's like someone's just got a list and just, they're wrong here. And then they point to the translator's preface. Oh, even the Hebrew's got some words wrong and things like that. It's like, so you have to do extra study. Like, to study a hopeless legomenon, you're looking at studying something 10 times harder than you would just finding a word that's got, it appears 40 other times in the Bible. You just read through those scriptures and you get the gist of what that word means. So.
There's nothing from the context that would make us think that he's referencing Revelation 16:5. Certainly not that he's quoting it, or that his version of Revelation 16:5 has the word esomenos. In fact, the point, an interesting point, is that esomenos is a synonym of ergomenos in terms of its meaning in the text.
So I'm just not sure about that. I know TurretinFan's saying it. I think it could be a claim by people who have actually rejected Beza's reading, because it's a bit like, say, Revelation 11:17. There would be people who follow that that's not scripture. But to me, it's just, I'm absolutely confident that it is, and but some people are absolutely confident that it's not. And so I guess in their studies, in the lexicons, in dictionaries, they're going to write all the Triadic Declaration only appears 3 times, and 2 other times it's in these other forms. And so to me, that messes everything up. But I guess in a way, yeah, some people, they have that that type of confidence in the critical text that they will also redefine things, or define it according to the information as they're seeing it. So say it like monogenes, to me, monogenes, it means only begotten. It's always meant only begotten in the Greek. So when we have monogenes, weos, the only begotten Son, in John 1:18, but some manuscripts say monogenes theos. To me, it's a Gnostic error. But what's happened is to sort of squeeze that word, the word God there, say the New American Standard Bible just has only begotten God, which to me is an accurate translation of the wrong reading. But some people will go, well, that's Gnostic. And so, James White will say, oh, well, monogenes means unique or one of a kind. And so what's happened is monogenes has been retranslated in almost every place. Like even John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, is changed to for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, or his only Son. It doesn't say only begotten, monogenes. And so this has been redefined. So monodikos means unique. And so to me, they would have used that if they were going to talk about the only begotten God, the unique God or whatever. But it's monogenes. And so to me, I see that they're actually redefining this word everywhere else to try and squeeze this reading of God into John chapter 1. And so to me, I from my perspective, I look at that and that's what I see is happening. And to me, my scholarship on that, I have no doubt that that's what's happening. And when I see other things, I go, well, someone is trying to twist that into their favor, And so when it comes to this thing of esomenos and ergomenos being synonyms, perhaps this is something to do with a rejection of this reading because we know people did reject it. And see, sometimes I'll read through Adam Clark and it's like he hates the King James half the time. He's saying the King James translators, they made a gross error here. They were fools. He's really harsh on them. And I go through it and I say, well, you're not seeing it from this angle. This is the way I see it, and it's very clear, But he knew a lot of languages. He was a smart guy. But that doesn't, I don't have to agree with all the commentaries of that era. But what I'm saying is it does seem to be a bit of a minority point of view. I know TurretinFan's put some information on his website. I've gone through it, but I haven't really studied through it. But yeah.
According to the view of a lot of commentators, or at least enough commentators, let's put it like that. So the fact that some father will use the word asomenos instead of ergomenos may simply be a matter of paraphrase, not a matter of having a different reading at Revelation 16:5. And in fact, in each of these cases where someone uses asomenos rather than ergomenos, we don't know, we can't just conclude that he's referring to Revelation 16:5, since there's 4 other places in which this alleged triadic declaration appears. And it could be any one of those places that's in mind, if any of them are in mind. And in each of these places that we looked at, in fact, it wasn't in mind, or at least it wasn't revealed that it was in mind. When it comes to Gregory of Nyssa, he says that Gregory of Nyssa calls Christ the asomenos, which we can it's just a throwaway point. It doesn't really have much to do with the thesis of the book, the Attis of Life.
Okay, so I think I mixed them up, Gregory of Nyssa and the other one, Clement, I think it was, of Alexandria. And one was talking about the Tetragrammaton specifically, and talking about the past and the future there, which is interesting. But yeah, I think it was Gregory of Nyssa who talks about the bride of Christ. It talks about the asomenos there. So interesting.
Bena has shalt be in both his Vulgate text and also in his commentary. So he uses Latin, not English. His shalt be there is a shalt be there, but the substitution that's provided is not there. A future tense is used by Bias of Bena. That is important, it's significant, but it's a further variant, not the variant that Beza was looking for. So there is a variant that Bias has that has a future form. We have to acknowledge that. We have to let that be what it is. But it does not support Beza's conjecture, notwithstanding that it has a future form of a verb that's a to be verb. Haimo Halbert Stadensis has shalt be in his commentary. We saw how this actually is undermines Nick's argument in a previous episode. Desiderius Erasmus has the triadic declaration as is to come in his annotations in all 5 editions, which seems to be.
So I can't see how Haimo would undermine what I'm saying, unless, because I've made several claims, because there's only 4 manuscripts before the 10th century. The thing is, you have to look and speculate, and I mean, part of textual criticism, if you talk to Peter Gurry, he says that it's more of an art form than a science. Oftentimes you're making scholarly guesses. You're looking at all the evidence and you're coming to a conclusion. And I mean, I've made it pretty clear and speculated about, well, perhaps they wrote something in the margin, perhaps they wrote something on top, perhaps they circled it, perhaps, I mean, even look at the name of Jehovah in the Old Testament, they didn't write it in there, the name of Jehovah. So perhaps a scribe went through and saw this as the name. Perhaps the triadic declarations weren't even written in there, and someone came back later and put them in like they did with the name of Jehovah. I mean, that's a possibility. If they're going through the whole Old Testament and not writing Jehovah and writing it later, and they're going through the New Testament and it's like, well, maybe the names of I am, maybe the triadic declaration, maybe they're like, well, let's not put them in there. And so it's a possibility. And like I said, to know how the Jews treated the name of Jehovah in the Old Testament is paramount. That's it's not really something I've touched on much. I just know enough about it to go, well, and even when James White, we were having the Twitter war, it was, I remember I just looked up the name Jehovah on Wikipedia, and I read down and it said sometimes substituted for the Holy One, with the Holy One in manuscripts. So sometimes it's substituted. Like, so you don't put the name of Jehovah there, you put the Holy One. And so I actually put that in my book. I've got a little, I think it's just a Wikipedia thing, or maybe it's actually the tweet of James White. I can't remember what it is now. But yeah, it's quite amazing. And I was looking up some things the other day, just typing in holy and typing in Jehovah and these type of things. And yeah, it was saying some very similar things in some more concrete, I think it was like Encyclopedia Britannica or something, often substituted with the Holy One. And it's like, man, so, I would, okay, so Trinity's just asked, where's that in the book? Okay. I'll just jump onto my Gmail. This is how I always get my book. For some reason, I don't download it onto my computer and go that way. I always go through Google for some reason. Okay, Revelation 16:5 print. I guess if I'd go Wikipedia, no, Wiki. Maybe I need to search. Anyway, I'll have a quick look. Actually, Holy One. Said Wikipedia there. Again, it's rather enlightening to appeal. Yeah, here. I've got a picture of it. So under the article Tetragrammaton, substitutions for the Hebrew forms are, and so that has a comma there. The Holy One, blessed be He. So substitutions for Hebrew forms are Hakadosh, Baruch Hu, the Holy One, comma, blessed be He. And so there was, I guess, if I go Jehovah, the Holy One. Okay, the Holy One of Israel. That's interesting. But what am I specifically looking for? Maybe it says here substitution. Okay, so maybe substitution. Okay, so it looks like that surrogates for God, such as El Shaddai, Hakadosh, the Holy One, and Adonai. The Holy One, blessed be He. Maybe it was in this article, because I was going through a whole heap of these. So, holy. Jehovah proper, the supreme name of God among the Hebrews, the latter Hebrews, It's so very holy, it might not even be pronounced. That's not it. Okay. So we got it. Oh no, that's not a book. Maybe it is. No. So this is the Old Testament contains various titles and surrogates for God, such as El Shaddai, El Elon, Hakadosh, which means the Holy One, and Adonai. So Hakadosh, that's an interesting thing to look at. Let's see if I can get the Hebrew letters for that. Do a bit of a search. It's a Hebrew site. Here we are. Etymology. Maybe I'll go to translate. I'll just translate this thing to English. God. Okay. But it's definitely in 3 parts there. The saint, blessed he. Okay, so the saint is probably holy, blessed is he, which seems to go in with what the book has in my one. The holy one, blessed be he. Okay. So I'll look for that reading and Jehovah. We'll see what comes up. It's hard when you're doing. I'll cut it, then go Jehovah. I hate Korah. Hebrew transliterations. Did Hashem regret something? God's name from Hebrew, Jehovah, directly translated from the Tetragrammaton. The Holy One he is. Okay, a Hebrew English dictionary. Okay, something academia writing the divine names. Okay. So Elohim, Al, Adonai. Okay, so here it has this one. So it says the process of distancing oneself from the Godhead intensified in the post-biblical period with the coining of the rabbinic literature such as divine epithets as the place, the presence, the holy, blessed be he, or surnames in apocalyptic literature like Master of the World. Okay, so that's interesting. So that's the word that or the phrase that we're looking for. The holy, blessed be he. I guess like the blessed holy or something like that. Just seeing if I can. That looks like a really good article, actually. That looks like Jehovah, Elohim, Book of Chronicles. So yeah, this is where I guess the study will lead to next, into all this sort of stuff. So, which I've only just briefly sort of touched on. I'll just see if I can find. Oops. No. Hebrew dictionary. Okay, Jehovah. What was the other one? It was the names of God. Okay, so let's have a look at it. I think I was looking for holy. There's quite a few Wikipedia articles which are very interesting. The Holy of Holies. Oh yeah, so here we are. Hakadosh, Berekuhu, the Holy One, blessed be he. So that's also in Aramaic and Arabic. But yeah, definitely that one there is interesting, and maybe I should also write substitution. Okay, I'm not seeing anything just at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of things that I really do want to look at, but I guess I'm just looking for a certain article that I can run with, but that'll have to be for another time, I think. So, TurretinFan's saying thanks, Kadosh, and sorry for the live questions. I just happened to be around when you were scheduled to go live this time. No, that's fine. I actually appreciate the sometimes being sparked to go in a certain direction, but okay.
Hakadosh Baruch Hu.
Hakadosh Baruch Hu.
Hakadosh Baruch Hu.
Hakadosh Baruch Hu. So the Holy One, blessed is He. So that's interesting. So this is Jews who identify as Orthodox and observe the law, so they usually use it. One of a number of names, one of a number of Hebrew euphemisms for the name of God. So this is a substitute for the name of God. So I've only sort of briefly mentioned it, and it was only just because the Wikipedia article, Hakadosh, and they just say the Holy One here. In what I had seen was it said the Holy One, blessed is He, or something like that. I guess I've really got to work out what this says and pull it apart and look up dictionary definitions for that. But yeah, so having the name of Jehovah at times substituted with the Holy One is something that was happening in Hebrew literature. So that would be interesting. I really would like to get Nehemiah Gordon. Maybe I can even get him on my program. That would be really good. Because I'm sure that if he looked at the amount of effort that I put into Revelation 16:5 and all this other stuff, regardless of whether he thinks I'm King James only, Stephen Andersonite or Ruckmanite or whatever he wants to call me, he might go, oh, well, he's obviously looked into it. We can have a good conversation. And so I might email him and just see where I go. It's funny, sometimes you email people who are like that and doors just open up. That's like with Georgios Papaniotis, just chatted with him, and we were talking about Sinaiticus and all sorts of things. And so it's quite interesting. But let's just continue on.
Neither here nor there, except to show where Beza got the idea of changing the text from, namely from Valla, who got it, or from Valla and Erasmus, but ultimately directly from Erasmus. Luther, Coverdale, and Calvin had will be for I am in Exodus 3:14, point which is neither here nor there. The Ethiopic of 1549 has shalt be at Revelation 16:5. This is a bit like the Beatus of Libana case, only it's worse for Nick's position in that the Ethiopic of 1549 actually supports the text that Beza was correcting rather than the text to which he corrected it. In other words, the previous text that he had, which had Kai Ho Hosias, that's the one that's supported by the Ethiopic of 1548. 1549 is when the project was finished, I guess. Anyway, so Tremelius and Unius shared.
So I'm not going to stop at all these points, but yeah.
Editions with Beza and adopted his reading when it came out, but that doesn't mean that they thought about or considered his reading here. They just adopted his entire text, as far as I'm aware. So unless he has some other idea. For example, Tremelius Syriac does not include the Book of Revelation because the Peshitta doesn't include the Book of Revelation. Calvin defined Jehovah and I am as the Triadic Declaration. That's kind of neither here nor there. We could just grant that point, loosely at least grant that point. Theodore Beza explained in his 1582 footnote that the Triadic Declaration appears when Jehovah appears. We'll go back to listen to our episode about that. I don't think that's what Beza said exactly, but we can.
Okay, so what I'm going to do on my website is I'm going to put all of the translations. So Jan Kranz's, TurretinFan's got some, and if they're your own translations, I don't really mind who's doing them. If they want to remain anonymous, it'd be great to go, okay, they're anonymous. But Stephen Boyce, the Smithsonian guy, Larry Brigden, and so Larry Brigden and Jeff Riddle, they've only translated like little sections of that and talked about it, and so but I'll put them there anyway, and so then I can line them all up and go, okay, so what's being said here, with all these independent voices talking about it. So I think that'll be good to do, because it is coming down to how things are translated, which I guess we're dealing with Bible translation. So of necessity, other things being translated from other languages, we're going to be going, okay, well, how's that translated, And the thing is, like, to me, some of these things, it's like if I read an NIV, I'm like, oh, these guys have got a bias. Read the Message Bible, read whatever. Everyone's got presuppositions and biases that they come in with. And so that's why I'm just, sometimes I look at Kranz and how he's worded things. It's like, is he trying to push his story there? Or just by using that one word, could he have used another word and it's going to go in a different direction? And so that's why I'm careful with that. The whole concept of Olim, and on my article of Revelation chapter 22, verses 16 to 21, on my website, you can see the section where I talk about how Kranz had changed Olim, and he goes against Erica Rummel's reading. And so, but I did notice TurretinFan mentioned something. It might have been in his latest Facebook thing. I can't really remember where it was from, but it was talking about how Erasmus said, he wouldn't have dared do this in the Gospels and things like that. I don't think he wouldn't have dared to do it in the Gospels because he thought lowly of the book of Revelation, but more so because of the amount of manuscript evidence. And so well, like James White, he was sort of saying, well, how come you're looking at this verse in Revelation 16:5 this way? Why aren't you applying this same methodology at 1 John 5:7 or at Ephesians 3:9 or at this other one? And I had a long think about it, and I actually wrote back to James White on Twitter, and I said, look, this is a unique word in a unique verse in a unique book. Most people say Book of Revelation, it's a unique book. It's not the same as all the other books of the Bible, and it doesn't have the same attestation of the Greek. If you go to the Gospels, there's a huge amount of attestation, and so I guess we can't read into every comment that it's like, oh well, I wouldn't have done this in the Gospels. Oh, that means he's just trashing the Book of Revelation. Like, to me, I always default to these guys respecting the Word of God, not that they're just like, so flippant, like I don't really care about the word, So, TurretinFan's says in YouTube comments of the last episode. Okay, so I'll have to go back through them.
Debate that if we need to when it comes to that point. The King James Version translators did not slavishly follow Beza, but chose to adopt shall it be, knowing that Beza was correct. So this is just speculation and assertion as to chose to adopt it knowing that he was correct. They did choose to adopt Beza's Greek text, but generally speaking, they just followed Beza's text. They rarely departed from Beza's text.
But they did depart from Beza's text, and so that's why you have the whole, Scrivener creating his own TR. Westcott and Hort didn't just go to Beza's text; they commissioned Ellicott and the translation committee commissioned Scrivener to do that because they knew there was enough differences to talk about, to say, well, this is a different variation of the Textus Receptus. And so for the King James translators to change at all in those points, and if they were in disagreement with Beza, they would have done it here. They had a precedent of pretty much everything except for the last few editions of Beza there, and maybe Henry Stephanus's, I think it was his 1587 edition, but they agreed with the reading, and so they would have changed it if they didn't see that it was, if they didn't believe it was a true reading. And so this is the thing with the King James. They weren't afraid to amend Beza's text according to what they had developed, and they're saying, well, no, we're going to go with this reading. And so, in a sense, where Jan Kranz is talking about the conjectural limitations, and as it's been pointed out, the vast majority of those are in the annotations. But the King James knew the annotations, and so they were going through reading Beza and going, actually, Beza's got a good point here. This can be amended. And so, as I've mentioned many times, people say, oh, there was no exact Greek text underlying the King James. And I'm like, well, they formulated their own. But when you go through those places, it's mentioned in the annotations of Beza. Like usually Beza talks about every type of, the Vatican, the what do you call it? Clementine, has this. The earlier Bibles have this. Erasmus has this, and he talks about it all. And so the King James translators were able to go through those type of things, and also they weren't just focused on Beza, because it clearly says in the preface. And so I think this has got to be something that's known. And I've showed it many times, but it's pertinent here. Dedication to King James, 1611. That's not the one. It's a little bit large, 400%. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so it says, for when your highness had once out of deep judgment apprehended how convenient it was that out of, number one, the original sacred tongues, number two, together with comparing the labors, both of our own, so English, that's number two, and other foreign languages of many worthy men who went before us, there should be one more exact translation of the Holy Scriptures into the English tongue. And so that, just that little saying there, it's very telling. So it says they went to the original languages. They didn't just go to the Bishop's Bible. Bishop's Bible was a draft, and that they overrode the Bishop's Bible with the original languages. And so they did that in many, many places. Okay, but they compared the English, the labors of our own, so the Tyndale, covered up all of the English Bibles they used, and other foreign languages. So what would be the foreign languages? Well, Hutter's Dodecaglot, the Syriac, I think they would have known about the Ethiopic. There was a translator who was, into the Ethiopic. And like, to me, it's like these guys were, many of them were polyglots of like some of the highest levels that's ever been seen, like Lancelot Andrewes. When you read his biography, it's like, man, what's his name? Alexander Ugales. He can speak 60 languages. And on his old website, which was really good, I don't know why he took it down, but he had the level of fluency. So he would talk about a language. See, he wasn't just fluent in 60 languages. He also knew, say about 200 other languages where he could count. He could say hello. He could, do things in them, but he would never consider that fluency. And he'd say, oh, he knows like 5% of the language. Because he was a language teacher, he knew how to figure out all these things. And so he would say, yes, in German, I'm at university level. Yes, in Korean, I'm at university level. Yes, in Arabic, I'm, because he was teaching like in Dubai, Korean students German, sort of thing. Like that's the sort of stuff that he was doing. And Lancelot Andrewes was on that level. So anyway, I won't go through all that again, but it's like, so out of the original sacred tongues, comparing the labors both of our own, the English and foreign languages. So what's left out there? If it's gone to the originals, speaking of the languages, Greek and Hebrew, Aramaic, then all the English Bibles and all the foreign language Bibles. What's outside of that? That encompasses everything. So they went to everything. And that's one of the things I say, the King James translators looked at absolutely everything. So anyway, I think I've sort of proven my point.
Nick has been instrumental in proving that they rarely departed from Beza's text. So it's a bit puzzling to make it sound like they didn't slavishly follow Beza. They generally did slavishly follow Beza. That's not necessarily a bad idea.
Well, I think the more and more that as time went along, the text became standardized, and Beza was just so happened to be the guy in that era who was like, oh, it's, you know, things are obviously pointing in this direction with that reading. I mean, you know, the text of Beza and the text of Stephanus there's not a huge amount of difference. There's enough to talk about, but yeah, and so, but the King James translators did make differences, and so, and they would have known about Revelation 16:5, and they would have known that this is equivalent to Jehovah there. It would have just been that they would have come to that text knowing that. So
Beza's text was viewed as a pinnacle of the current textual critical wisdom. So he was highly respected as bringing the text in its purest form to light. So they were trying to use what they thought was best. They didn't use it utterly slavishly. They did sometimes depart from it. But as Nick has already kind of demonstrated, the number of places they departed from it is very few. Some of those places they departed from it are things like that are like Nick has pointed this out. Some of the places are things like the spelling of Beelzebub instead of Beelzebul. That's not a very big departure, and that the reason for that is not that they disagreed with Beza's textual criticism. The reason there seems to be that they were just following the traditional spellings, which they were called to do by the Archbishop under King James. It says that the King James Version translators didn't leave a note or italic, which they did do at John 2:23, and therefore they didn't consider it a minority reading. So I don't know. We talked very briefly about the King James Version translators. They didn't address the issue at all in their notes, and so I would just think their silence is just silence. I wouldn't read anything into it. In most places, they just didn't address it. They have a lot of notes, but in most places where there's variants, they didn't note the variant or talk about the variant. Most places, not every place, but most places. The Dutch Statenvertaling also, he says, independently chose the reading and left no italic or footnote. I don't know the Dutch Statenvertaling process enough to know what level of independence it had, but it just seems they were following Beza's text.
okay, so I was just last night on my website putting in, I'll just go up to the index to the Dutch Statenvertaling. So that just means the States Bible. So I'll just show you this. So I just put a tiny bit more information, Exodus 3:14 in the Dutch Bible, and I'll put a pretty picture on here. So this has the I am. So I'm going to be focusing a lot on the I am, that sort of thing, because it does seem to be a little bit lacking in my presentation. So it has I am. The her is the Lord here, but you'll notice their original, which had the marginal notes and everything. It has apocal 1:4:8 and ende, so or through to Revelation 16:5. So that's interesting. And then it has Hebrews 3:8, which is the Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever, the past, present, future. So this was, you know, people who did these notes, they understood at Exodus 3:14 that this was relative to the Triadic declarations and other past, present, and future concepts. And so we can see on this picture here, so just so you know, I'm not adding, so it talks about the name Jehovah here, and here it has apocal 1:4:8 ende 16. It has 1:5. Okay, I think that's just a typo though, because I actually, it has 50, 16:15, which you would think, yeah, it's a typo, because I that was copied from the website that has this there. So, but it does say 16:1 1.5. But I think everyone would be in agreement that's most probably a typo. Because it's 16:15. I don't think there's anything in 16:15. Revelation 16:15. Anything of any interest. Look at the King James just in case half the verse is missing. Oops. King James. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked in it. So it's just nothing to do with I am there or anything. Yeah, so I would just suggest that's a typo. And to clarify that, it's probably, if I looked at later editions, that's probably tied it up. So, but anyway, I just sort of point that out that I put that up there just yesterday. Let's continue.
They don't have any note explaining their reasoning or even suggesting that they thought about or noticed the issue. However, it is in Bayes' annotations, so unless they were using an unannotated version or unannotated printing, then, so be it. Then, after that note about the Dutch Statenvertaling, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 points that start with James White. So, in fairness to Nick, having listened to everything he said so far, I will do my best to try to evaluate his points as he goes through here. In some cases, the short answer is I don't really care whether or not James White said this. I'll let James White defend James White, and I will just take it as Nick says that James White says, and not go down the whole path of did Nick James actually say this, unless I think it's important to say otherwise. So he says James White says the pronunciation of Jehovah is false and Yahweh is true against the basic facts. So James White's position on this is pretty much the standard scholastic, or the standard scholarly view of today. It's nothing unique or special to James White. The idea that it's against the basic facts, I think, is completely false, but it's really aside. It has nothing to do with Revelation 16:5. James White in the Jack Mormon debate claimed that the Nomina Sacra was originally designed to save space in the manuscripts. I agree that that's not supported, that it's just to save space. I don't think that's supported by any evidence. It is an effect of using them is to save space, but that is the original purpose. I think we just don't know what the original purpose was. Was it a superstition? We're not told. Again, it's inconsistently done at first, and it moves on later and later. It just becomes done with more and more things. But the idea that it was just to save space is one explanation. I personally don't think that it's the best.
I think that's where you're understanding what the Hebrews thought about their own text is very important, and then the early Christians, because there were a lot of early Christians who were Jews, and even the Christians who would have been interested in the Old Testament, they would have been asking the Jews, how do you do this, how do you do that? And especially the Christian Jews, the apostles, they were all Jewish, the original apostles, and so they would have been asked, how do you do this, how do you because they would have wanted the Old Testament, and we can see that's where I believe the Septuagint came from, is from the early church, and just the necessity of the Greek churches wanted the Old Testament, they wanted to read it, and so that's how I think that these scribal habits would have been known or thought about, and so.
Best. I think it might be interesting as another theory that it's done to avoid persecution by making certain words appear to be Greek numbers, which is what the overline generally would have meant to people who see the words and then they see it overlined, they would think it's a number. That's how the Greeks use letters, but with overlines to indicate numbers. So it might be that it was just designed to hide the nature of the manuscript so that persecutors wouldn't be able to realize that this was a Christian manuscript because it didn't have things like the name of Jesus in it. So instead it just had this odd number that occasionally pops up. So was that the reason? I don't know. It's speculation. I'm speculating. Nick can speculate as well. And speculation is what it is. But again, it doesn't seem to have any particular bearing on the thesis of this book. What was the original purpose of those? James White claimed Beza changed the reading to make it nice and poetic and rhythmic, but failed to reveal the link to Jehovah I Am and how it is a complete formula of the most holy name of God. So I think nice and poetic and rhythmic, maybe an oversimplification, maybe, but this idea that he was trying to harmonize the text and smooth it, I think is a fair take.
Well, I think there's several aspects to it. There was harmonization, there was manuscript that Beza had, there was the concept of him seeing that the holy and righteous shouldn't really be connected because of the definite article, modifying the and. Issues like the accepted reading in the Reformation was the and it seemed to just go and holy, it just had this strange type of thing. Then there's the issue of it once you spell all that out, it spells the exact name of I am, the etymology of Jehovah, and then so you have all these things, lots and lots of different things all coming into play. So we can't just point to one thing and say, well, that's why Beza did it, because he does mention several things in his annotations, but also some of these mentioned in Revelation 1:4, but also they are some of them are just elementary concepts of the name of Jehovah's there, or the name of I am is there, so so when James White's saying, oh well, the word has just he saw a significant similarity between Osios and Asomonos, I just don't think that there's really any proof for that. I don't think he's offered any proof. But the guy from the KJV Today website, and he wrote that article a long time ago. Now I noticed that he's expanded on his the sacred name concept, because I guess he's probably read through my material and gone, okay, well that's interesting. But he does often do that. He'll talk about this word could have been this big. If it was a nomina sacra, it's gone down to this big. Or Osios, that might have been the part that had the nomina sacra on it, and so people thought it was a Somenos because the E, the epsilon, the line faded, and all this sort of stuff. So but the thing is, what James White said there, it's his concept, but it's sort of stated as fact, like that's really what happened. And also, I think that the most glaring concept is that, and it's not written in my book, is that Beza clearly said he had an ancient manuscript, where James White interprets that he didn't have an ancient manuscript, and it's a conjecture. So I think that he was only looking at the restitui bit. He's restored it. But what from? From an ancient manuscript, where James White seems to think that it's said, from a conjectural emendation.
Similar to what Kahn's take is on Beza's conjectures in general, his emendations in general, whether or not they're conjectural emendations or emendations based on manuscripts. He likes to try to keep the text smooth and harmonious. We saw that mentioned by Kahn. So I think James White's point here is correct, even if it may sound a bit trivial to say it that way. As far as there being a link to the name Jehovah or I am and how it completes the formula, I don't think that Dr. White's point is that it doesn't complete the formula. His point is just that it's kind of like the way people like to complete something. If you hear bump, everyone wants to put the bump at the end. But that doesn't mean it was there originally, just because we like how it sounds.
Well, I don't think that that's the issue. I think it's just, we know it's saying a name. There's no reason why the name would be cut short unless usually the scribes are doing this. And as I've mentioned, the Hakadosh, or whatever, however you pronounce it, the holy one, blessed be he, is a possibility, And to me, it's up there with high probability, because it's the name of Jehovah and it's the name of I am. And so, but that's going to be stuff I'm going to have to go through the Hebrew and everything. Now, for some reason in the background, I've been looking this up. This is a very interesting error in the 190 list of Scrivener. Scrivener has this reading, where Beza has, so basically it's just the acute symbol is facing one way or the other, okay? So in his 1605, it has this, but in the 1598, on closer examination, he has that. And so what Scrivener did, now I'm not sure why I've got those like that there. That's probably not exactly correct, but what Scrivener did is he saw the line down here and thought that was just a blob of ink. And he hasn't seen that this is the printer putting both of those forms in. And so that's the acute symbol right there. You can just sort of hardly see, you know. And so this is at Luke 8:5. Now, lost my spot. Where are we? No. Okay, we'll go to Luke 8:5 here. Sorry about that. It's not doing what I wanted to do. Luke 8:5. There we go. Should be. Why is it going to the bottom of the page? Mark. So yeah, this is just one of those things where I'm just pointing out that Scrivener got this completely wrong. It was Luke 8, sorry. And yeah, he's made a bit of a fuss about this. But the reality is, when you look at the manuscripts and you go through it, you can see, I don't even really know what I'm looking for here. Here, that's the O there, and that's the acute symbol. So Beza has it there, but then when you go through Scrivener's, he says that this is an error, and it should be read as, I don't know why it's going to Revelation there. Usually when you hit the back button, it goes straight back to where you were. For some reason, it's making my presentation very awkward. And so, yeah, so I go through Beza and I go through the King James. Now, Scrivener basically said that this was an error, okay? The reality is Beza does have this and not that. So Scrivener missed this, and because of this line here, he just didn't pay close attention, okay? So for some reason, something the TurretinFan's said, about Beza, for some reason, I felt obligated to show that. Now I can't remember why, because there's been 20 other things that have happened. Okay, so that should be 1 John 2:23 instead of John 2:23. Okay, yeah, I knew what you were talking about anyway. So if we go, I might even just quickly go there. Because this is an interesting verse, and it is to do with textual criticism. Because the KJV usually follow Beza, yeah, and so I think it was just sort of to show that Scrivener many times he was a good scholar, but not at the level of Beza or the King James translators. That they were able to see his text and translate it properly, and so where Scrivener commissioned to do that couldn't, and he didn't really do a lot of homework. He's saying, oh, this is another error, one of the 190 ones. He's made it a printed text on that. All he had to do was a little bit of homework like what I did, and you can say, oh, that's just he's not seeing it properly. So, but I guess, it's probably easier nowadays with computers. We can zoom in and all the rest of it. So here we have, so this reading here, talking about, but he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. In the 2023 edition, I don't have that in italics. The reason why is because the Trinitarian Bible Society began printing this part of the verse without italics, because there is enough manuscript evidence to point to this. So, but the thing is, it actually appears in Beza's text, the whole reading. So they were actually not, they weren't reflecting the text of Beza. They were actually reflecting, say, the 1550 text, which when you go down here, I should have a picture of that. Well, that's the 1565 doesn't have it. You can see it ends at XE. And so you have all this in 1598. So Computation Polyglot just has all these lines there, but usually those lines are there to show that something is a bit of a miss. It's perhaps in the Latin, but they can't find it in the Greek, sort of thing. The hexapla. So yeah, the received text has that reading there. This is a hexapla, which I guess is the 1550, and so yeah, it stops there. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, but this is what it had in the original King James. Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father, but he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. So this was just to show that was a, so that would be in italics, in modern italics there, but this is the original 1611. But so the reading of Isomenos being, shall be, you would think that they would put it in this type of thing, or at least a footnote, or because they do have textual footnotes in the King James, just not that many, because they were pretty much in agreement with what they had. So the Coverdale Bible, whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father. So that's interesting. It's got the King James reading there. So it's an interesting study to do. And so I've got a lot there from KJV today. The words he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also, 1 John 2:23, were italicized because the King James translators initially did not find them in the majority of Greek manuscripts and in earlier editions of the Textus Receptus, but rather strongly in the Latin. The reading is in the 1598 of Beza, whose parallel Latin version contains the reading without italics. So one thing that's good to know is Beza, he has, so that's his 1598, but usually you got the Latin next to it. So Beza, he actually has italics in his Latin text. And like say in Matthew, I'll just quickly go there, Matthew chapter 1, verse 6, I think it is, where they have, they have been the wife of Urias. This is, that's why it's going to those, because I've got some sort of find feature there. Yeah. So this, the italics, so I don't have a picture of the italics in Beza's there, but he does have the same italics of he who had been the wife of Uriah. And so I think I can quickly, if you go to books, I've got all the editions of the Textus Receptus in there. We'll go to the 1598. We'll see how quickly we can do this. Should be able to pull it up very quickly. Content, Matthew, it should be the first page. Okay, verse 6 here. So we can see the italic here. So ex eque furat uxor uriae. So that is in italic, and so that's why the King James many times follow the italics of Beezer. Not in every place, but it is. But yeah, Beezer had that type of thing as well. So which is quite interesting, and that and so, but yeah, when we go to Beezer's text here on, let's just go to 1 John chapter 2. Verse 23. So where are we now? Okay, so it's 1 John 2. So we've got a couple of pages to go. Two 8, 2:13, 2:18 should be the next one, I think. 2:23, yes. So we don't have an italic in Beezer. So Beezer's pretty certain that this is a Greek reading, and he's got it written there. The King James translators, they put it in the italic there, and usually there's a note on this type of thing. So verse 23 down here, and yeah, so I just sort of mentioned that, and so if you go through the Textus Receptus, it's in the Greek, it's in the Latin without an italic, and so yeah, the King James has that reading there. It has the italic, and that's to show that earlier editions of the Textus Receptus that didn't have that reading. They wanted to make sure that people knew about that, and so sometimes they had that type of information in a margin, but here they put it in italic there. The Trinitarian Bible Society has taken out that italic. It was interesting. Someone was doing a critique of the 2023 edition, King James, that's come out. And so just randomly, he went to that verse and said, oh, the italics are taken out. And he said, what about the italic in 1 John 3:16, where it says the love of God, and it's in italic? He looked there and went, oh, the italic's out of there too. He said, I think this Bible must just delete all the italics, or just, doesn't have italics. But it's actually, it was probably the two places that are controversial, because I'm following the Trinitarian Bible Society in my text where I don't have that in italic. And also the love of God, where I believe that's an error in the Blaney edition, where the 1611 doesn't have of God in italics, but they do have the of God in italics in the 1769 Blaney edition. And strangely enough, the New King James just omit those two words, of God, and don't even have a note or anything. They're gone. I guess they just thought they were italics, or they're not in there, and they just deleted them. But it's like, no, they're in Beezer's text, it's in Scrivener's text, it's in the King James, but it's like New King James just delete it and don't even put a note. And the thing is, it's actually about the deity of Christ. And so now that I mention it, I'll quickly bring that up, and then we'll move on, because I know I'm rabbit trailing a lot. So let's just go to 1 John 3:16. So yeah, TurretinFan's sort of figured out why I went on a rabbit trail. I still haven't figured that out yet, and I'm just like, why did I do that? TurretinFan says, my point was just that there was a minor typo in your book on the conclusion of 1 John. Okay, so sorry. I thought that you had mentioned that in your video, and you were saying that you said John. Okay, so yeah, that's a good point. So here we have hereby proceed with the love of God. So it's in italics in the Blaney edition. So the love of God. I should really italicize that, but I haven't really put all the Strong's numbers and everything in there. But, and I guess, I've written more on the commentary here. So the love of God is not in italics in 1611. It's in the text of Beza. It's in his Latin as well. To Theo, Charitatum Dei, and it's also in the Vulgate. It's mentioned in the annotations, so it's not just a typo or anything. And it's in Scrivener. So if you were to go to the TR of Scrivener, it's in there, which the New King James says it follows. And even then, if you avoided that, you go to Beza, it's in there, because they say they follow the underlying Greek text, and then they say it's Scrivener. Well, even if they were to miss that and go back to Beza, it's like they've just gone through and gone, it's in italics, let's delete it. And oftentimes that's what they do, because I've compared the entire New Testament with the King James in the New King James many, many times. And so what I find is they just get the italics and throw them out, but not understanding that the 1769 has a lot more italics than the 1611 does. So say when it has Matthew chapter 1 verse 17, the word "are" there is mentioned 3 times. In the King James, it's not in italics. In the 1769, it is in italics. So to me, this was put in italics by error, or pointing back to an earlier TR edition. But clearly, the New King James here says by this we know love, not that we know, hereby perceive we the love of God. It's way different. And listen to this. In the New King James, it just says, by this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. Okay? Listen to this. Hereby perceive we the love of God, because he, who? God, laid down his life for us. It's talking about Jesus is God. That's in the New King James. The people are like, why don't you read the New King James? Mark Ward will jump on there. I'm like, because of these things, because the deity of Christ is not there. It's gone, and for no reason. There's no reason why they had to depart from that, except for they just went, oh, these italics, they're just added. Let's just throw them out, It's sophomorish, the way that they've done that. They should have at least had a note and explained themselves, but they just deleted it. Of God's gone. So I was glad to put that back in the 2016 edition, Love of God, because it's got he laid down his life for us. Who? God. By this we perceive the love of God, because he laid down his life for us. I love that verse.
James White claims there's not a question about it on anyone's part as to what the passage actually reads, but many questioned it. In terms of defending James White's point, he means now we have enough evidence to know what the original Greek was, not that Vala didn't say it or Erasmus didn't have a question.
No, in the context, he was clearly saying historically no Christian had ever seen the reading. And when he's saying the reading, he's not saying the whole entire verse of Revelation 16:5. He's talking about the future form, shall be. And so I've got his book handy here. So he says, so how does the AV defender respond to the documentation? The King James Version contains a reading created out of the mind of Theodore Beza. So he's saying it's just a creation of Beza. So he coined this. So it hasn't been before Beza. Okay, he's pretty clear on that. One unknown to the ancient church, unknown to all Christians until the end of the 16th century. So it's pretty clear. He has 3 or 4 ways of saying no one's ever said it. John did not write and shall be. He wrote and holy one. So notice he didn't say, John didn't write, O Lord, which art and wast and shall be, for you have judged us. He clearly says, and shall be. He said he didn't write "and shall be." He wrote "Holy One." This is a united testimony of all relevant historical information. To deny this is to engage in the most egregious form of irrational thought. It is not faith to deny reality; it is deception. And so, yeah, he's very clearly talking about this shall be reading is just nowhere. And then that's why I'm like, well, let's challenge that. Let's look at it. Oh, we found it here. We found it. That's why I'm specifically talking about the shall be reading, because I'm responding to James White's book.
Let's see. James White says Beza. Well, he also points out the Elseviers here. Nick does. James White said Beza simply made the reading up, and I agree that Beza simply made the reading up. Now he justified his reasons for making it up, but
so TurretinFan's agreeing he just made the reading up. But see, TurretinFan is saying Beza made the reading up, the whole verse, sort of thing, piecing together the verse or whatever his concept is. Where clearly I'm responding to James White, him saying the shall be reading is nowhere, and so that's where the whole thing is coming across, where he's answering something in a way which is completely different to my narrative, James White's narrative, and what we've been focusing on. See, when I talk to James White, he doesn't go all this route. He just talks about the shall be thing because he knows that's what he wrote in his book, and he knows in his seminars that's what he's talking about. So I'm like, oh, this has the shall be reading. So, oh, okay, well, yeah, and so he'll only really engage on that shall be issue. Where TurretinFan's like, oh, okay, we're dealing with all this other peripheral material. And I'm like, well, okay, well, if you want to deal with all that, I'll deal with it. You know, I'll go through the Lord thing. I'll go through the whole Triadic Declaration thing, you know. And so I have mentioned all this other stuff to get, you know, the name of I am, Jehovah, and all that sort of pointed to the Nomina Sacra thing and all that. But it's like, yeah, the vast majority of, you know, evidence and looking at back at Beatus of Libana. So the whole thing is with Beatus of Libana, the Ethiopic, like, to me, that's just so happens to have that, and it's great. But my concept is that this is the name of Jehovah, and it's like, okay, if you spell out the name of Jehovah, you get the past, present, future. So it should have the past, present, future there, and it doesn't. So to me, that's a glaring, obvious error. You know? So.
But he did make it up. So I don't know if the emphasis is on the word simply, okay. And then the quotations provided for that were, why should I take Theodore Beza's conjectural emendation where he decides a reading on the basis of what he likes, and the King James Version contains a reading created out of the mind of Theodore Beza, both of which are correct statements by James White. So yeah, I'm not sure why we should pick on James for that. The next one, James White said, nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way, which we haven't seen any contrary evidence, and was unknown.
See, no, this is why I'm just like flabbergasted, because it's like, well, there's no evidence for, and clearly James White's talking about shall be. I mean, even in that section, he has shall be in quotation marks, and so that's why I'm saying TurretinFan has moved the goalposts. Because, and just like if I was talking about monogenes weos or monogenes theos, yeah, we might look at all the other parts of that verse and, you know, look at different aspects of it. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with those two words, or pretty much the one word. But we have to deal with the monogenes issue as well. But it's like, if I came along and I was only just focusing on everything else around that verse and other variants, and I'm sure that I could find, you know, manuscripts with other variants all over the place there, and sometimes it's minority reading, sometimes majority reading, you know, specifically like even in Thomas Ross's debate, he brought up that there is 105 variations, 105 conjectures where you have the readings are not found in any manuscript. It's a patchwork mosaic where you've got Vaticanus says this, Sinaiticus says this, Vaticanus says this other thing, and it's patched together, where neither of them read that reading, but if you put it all together, it does. And so that's where he said there's the 105 of these, which is interesting. And so I'm pretty sure Maurice Robinson brought that up and talked about that. And so anyway, let's just continue. Okay, so TurretinFan says, I'll try to explain myself more clearly in the final episode. Okay, so, and, you know, outside of, you know, critiques of me, I don't mind what you say about it. But when it's like, okay, well, Nick's saying the Ethiopic has the reading, and so this is where I was, you know, taking Stephen Boyce to task, because he was saying, I'm claiming it's got all the whole reading, this and that, and so, and I apologize if I'd ever done that, you know, because when you're dealing with all this information, sometimes you like, you know, Jehovah, I am, Triadic Declaration, and so you're bound to make a speaker, you know, and just say something wrong. But the main thrust has been the shall be a Somenos reading, and from the beginning I'm talking about that in the definition of Jehovah, definition of I am, saying it's actually all in the future form, and so it all leans towards a Somenos straight from the get-go, and my argument leans towards a Somenos, and so, and the thing is, I'm coming against this. That's what I was looking for. So the shall be is, it's pretty clear that it's the main thrust of what James White's talking about. So he's not talking about the whole verse there. He's just saying that this is yeah, so if I just get that, so we can clearly see, oops, it's so hard to do this. Yeah, why does it read and shall be? Because John Calvin's successor at Geneva, and it has Somenos, the future form, shall be. There's no manuscript evidence for it. And then clearly in this section, he's saying, and shall be. And so that's why I'm all the time just saying, well, all I'm doing is responding to James White, and he shall be. That's the main thrust. So if I had written the book in the defense of the whole Triadic Declaration reading, I would have gone into a whole bunch of different arenas. But in a way, I am defending it because, but my only defense of it is really, it's related to I am, to Jehovah, etc. But when it comes to, you know, these manuscripts with a future reading in it, I'm pointing to that. Now there are places, I guess, where I'm saying, okay, well, this, you know, say Haemo Halberstadensis, it has, you know, the past, present, and future. Okay, well, that's talking about a Triadic Declaration and things like that. But I do sort of go out of my way to point those things out, where the other ones I'm pretty clear. It's like, well, some have the past, some have the present, some don't have any of that. Some just say eternal, you know, in the Arabic and things like that, in the French. Even the French, because Beza did the French Geneva Bible, he just has eternal. So he's seeing that as a way to translate that. Now, I better double check that. Revelation 16:5, French. No, the French does have who was and is to come. But there was some French Bible. Okay, we got the French ones here. I'm not sure why I'm saying it, like, just as much as like the Arabic Bible. Oh yeah, this was also the translation used in several French editions linked to I am, Jehovah. In the summary, okay, so for some reason just as much as I know, like the Arabic has eternal there. Yeah, because here in the polyglot of Walton, it has eterne. I've got this in some French Bible as well, and I'm pretty sure it was the Theodore Beese's one, but to me that one just has the was and is to come. So anyway, okay, 1555. Just quiesced et qui. And this has Justus et Domine. That's in the Latin. This would be the French, I guess. Quies and qui estios and saint. Anyway, it's more homework for me.
Known to the ancient church, unknown to all Christians until the end of the 16th century. Again, we haven't seen evidence to the contrary. And oddly, Nick says many people thought it read that way. That's just not the case. That's not the case if we mean the way that Beza amended the text. Not a lot of people said, even the strongest evidence that Nick was able to find, which are things like the Addis of Libena and the Ethiopic, which use a future verb form in the translation, both of those are not reading Revelation 16:5 with Pesamenos replacing Osios. Both of those versions are versional evidence, and both of those versional evidence seem to indicate the presence of sanctus in Latin. I don't remember the Ethiopic word, but ultimately Hosios as being present.
And so I know on the artwork on the front of the book, what I originally wanted to do, but I ran out of time, was, I'm just trying to find where that is. Here we are. Printed book. And so what I really wanted to do, this artwork's amazing. And to me, it's sort of like, you've got these interconnecting I am, Jehovah, Book of Revelation, Triadic declarations, past, present, and future, and the more you look at it, the more that you see, the Bible interconnected. And so it just seemed like a really amazing picture that when I looked at it, I just thought of this concept. But what I actually wanted to have was the scripture, like say in the King James, which I guess I've probably got written out here. Should have written out. Yeah, say the scripture written like this, but a little bit arty, and then over and shall be have like a sticker over the front of it with holy written on it. So that would have given a visual of like, okay, you peel the holy off and you got shall be there, sort of thing. And that was what was going on in my mind when I wrote the book. And so, but as I've mentioned, there could have been several concepts of, this could have been a marginal note. It could have been something written above it. It could have been something that was written next to it. It could, perhaps like with the stuff that Nehemiah Gordon is saying, this, if they knew this was the name of Jehovah, maybe they didn't write the whole thing in there. Maybe they wrote it later, which is very interesting. But perhaps they didn't do that in Greek, So, but the thing is, this is the expansion of I am in the name of Jehovah, which Jews were constantly tinkering with the name of Jehovah. They were obsessed with it. They're many times not writing it in manuscripts at all, because they have manuscripts where the name Jehovah is just missing in the whole thing. They just didn't get around to it. And so, and as Nehemiah Gordon points out in one of his videos, it's written in smaller font, bigger font, but usually the same pen. They've tested the inks and stuff and it's the same. But anyway.
In this text, it's a little bit unclear with Ethiopic whether the word for holy was in the text, but I think it's reasonable to conclude that it was, and Hoffman did as well. Hoffman is an expert in Ethiopic. So,
well, I think it's sort of like says righteous and just, which I think just and righteous are very similar, almost synonyms. So that would have to be some like that word. I'd have to go through the Bible and look for where that word appears in the Ethiopic, either in the Old or New Testaments, and just find good definitions of that so that can get cleared up, whether it does say holy or whether it's just or.
Let's see. So the point is this. Many people thought it read that way. That's not true. That's not supported by facts. And the one piece of evidence I should point out here, the one piece of evidence that Nick has brought up, it's not mentioned in this book because Nick's view has changed a little bit, is that Beza had a manuscript that said this. That's Nick's thing. But Nick can't point to an actual manuscript that Beza had. Nick can't demonstrate that Beza actually had the manuscript. And in fact, even if Beza had a collation of a manuscript and didn't have a manuscript, we don't know what the collation note said or what the manuscript on which the collation note was based said. And there's a consistent way to understand Beza, which doesn't require us to go down that garden path of suggesting that Beza actually had a manuscript with the words that Beza eventually substituted, Isomenos. We don't need to try to find a manuscript that had such a word. It's more simple to just say it's the article. The article that's present is the issue for Beza. Now,
so there's quite a lot in that, and one of the reasons why I'm pushing back on that is because this seems to be the way. I'm pretty sure it was Elijah Hixson went this route, and he was getting his info from Jan Kranz, and it just seems to be like, well, and when I was debating these guys on Facebook, this is going back a few years ago. I think it might have even been before the book came out. It was like, well, Henry Stephanus, he did the collations, and he was just a babbling idiot. How could he have collated these manuscripts? He was only 18 years old, blah, blah, blah. And so it just became, if you point towards these collations, then you have that type of argument. It just goes straight to the gutter where it's like, so that's why I actually mentioned in my videos, I was like, TurretinFan's probably going to go in this direction, and sure enough, it went in that direction. And that's why I'm just sort of just questioning the whole thing and going, well, okay, well, where's the collations? And, and that's why I've made a pretty big point of like, let's look at who Henry Stephanus is, and let's look at his scholarship. And even the other day, TurretinFan was saying he was a better textual scholar than Beza. I was like, well, that's a change, because usually Jan Kranz and Elijah Hixson are saying that he was a dimwit, basically. And so I was expecting TurretinFan to go that route, but he sort of went the opposite. It's like, he's better than Beza. It's like, okay, well, but at the end of the day, to me, I take Beza at his word. He said, there's an ancient manuscript. It's got the reading there. And he says that why would he doubt it? He's restored the reading, Ho Somenos, from that. So it does seem just to say that very clearly. And I've got no reason to doubt Beza. If like I've read through Kranz's material, I've got more reason to doubt Kranz than I do for Beza, 100-fold. And so anyway.
Other people have thought that Beza had some kind of manuscript of this reading. But that assumption is based on the idea that Beza had more than just the collation notes and the two manuscripts that he occasionally cited, Beza Canterburyensis and Codex Clairmontis, or Claromontanus, and we don't have good evidence to suggest that he had some additional manuscripts that are just unmentioned to us, that conveniently appear just for this verse of Revelation. So that's not a good reading of that evidence, which didn't come up in this book, but still, it's not a good reading. James White claimed every Greek text, not just the Alexandrian text, but all Greek texts, majority text, the Byzantine text, every manuscript, the entire manuscript tradition reads, O Holy One. So this point is a minor overstatement on Dr. White's part. Some do read and holy as opposed to O Holy One. Some actually omit.
So one of the reasons why I mentioned this was because James White had usually said, wherever you see a lot of textual variation in a verse, you know that there has been a problem there. And so say around 1 John 5:7, we see even 1 John 5:6, 1 John 5:8, we see quite a lot of variation in all those as well. We see wherever there has been like an omission or an addition, or where it's quite a big deal, usually surrounding those verses is a lot of textual variation. So that's why I brought it up, that about James White. It could be because he doesn't mention that here, where I think if he had just mentioned, look, let's look at the earliest, because in his book he's constantly going back to Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and saying all the best manuscripts have all this and that. And it's like, okay, let's go back to the reading of P47. Okay, well, it has the and here. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, well, okay, it disagrees with Sinaiticus, disagrees with, I think it's Alexandrinus. Okay, we got the Byzantine reading usually says this type of thing. And so, in a sense, where I'm just pointing out that, well, I guess in James White's defense, he is mostly focusing on shall be, as I am, But usually his modus operandi is to go, well, wherever there's a whole bunch of variants, there is a problem in the text. And so that's just a roundabout way of me saying, yes, there is a problem in the text and Beza fixed it. Not there's a problem in the text and we should just keep it like that. And so there is variation among the manuscripts that James White's saying, oh, they all read the same thing. I'm like, well, no, they actually don't. And when you look at this minutia, even Beza is talking about this type of minutia and talking about the article and talking about the chi and this type of thing. And so he's focusing on this as well. And so anyway, so it's brought up in my book.
The part of the verse or something like that. But this might be an instance where Dr. White has fallen into this negative, the negative use of the apparatus danger that was talked about by Cons that Beza fell into. Beza thought that if something wasn't mentioned as a variant, it just didn't exist. The reason why the other variants aren't mentioned beyond the issue of whether or not chi should be there is because those other variants aren't, they're not viable variants beyond the chi variant. So the chi one is interesting. I think it's about 30% of the texts that I saw had the chi, but the majority don't. So, but none of them, all of them support, well, nearly all at least, support the readings that Beza was correcting from, or the Nestle-Aland 28 reading, both of which are the same in terms of not substituting Esomenos for Hosias, and none of them support substituting Esomenos for Hosias. Not any of them support that substitution. So James White's point is correct, even if his wording is a little bit, like a little bit of an overstatement. Now, it may have just been an on-the-fly statement, I don't remember. But in any event, maybe his wording is a little bit overly broad there, but the point behind it is correct. What about, and whether or not the chi is there ultimately doesn't address the substitution that Beza made. Although if it's not there, if the original doesn't have it there, then Beza's explanation is for sure wrong. But anyway, James White said Beza believed there was sufficient similarity between the Greek terms Hosias and Esomenos to allow him to make the change to harmonize the text with other such language in Revelation. But it's very clear, Nick says, that Beza changed the text due to other reasons, not because they have similar Greek lettering, revealing his ignorance of Beza's annotations. So
Well, one of the reasons why I'm saying it's revealing the ignorance of James White, because he didn't know this is a tetragrammaton there. Didn't know it's related to I am there. Didn't know that the expansion of I am equaled Revelation 16:5 reading in the Textus Receptus. He didn't know any of that. And so I didn't know any of that either. So I could equally say, well, I've been ignorant of that as well. But I'm just saying it reveals why it's ignorant of all this sort of stuff. And he was refusing to listen. Like when I was like, oh, look, I'm discovering all this stuff and showing it. He was like, no, and just blocking. He's just blocking me. I'm blocked all over the place by James White. And so, I gave him the book in his hand. He's like, I refuse to read it. I'll never read it. It's like, okay. Like, well, and then he would just say all this stuff about me and I can't respond. There's just no way that I can defend myself. And it's like, so when I'm saying, okay, James White's ignorant of this, you can take the tone out of that. Because sometimes when I write things, people can think I'm being really hard. But when they meet me in person, they're like, oh, you're actually a really nice guy, But when it's like I'm writing like on Facebook, like even the back and forward that me and TurretinFan had the other day, it seems to be like I've got out a knife and I'm stabbing him in the stomach, but I'm actually just trying to summarize things and just keep it factual. And it looks like I'm just being really blunt and like, and I guess, James White saw that side and he was like, I don't want to have dealings with this guy. But at the end of the day, he would have benefited from my information. And, he probably could have, like if he had actually read my book and gone, oh, that's interesting, Nick. Well, that brings light to it. But I would still go with the holy reading because that's what the majority says. And I think that even if it is a holy there as a form of nomina sacra, it's what the majority of manuscripts say. So I think that we should still have that. And I've heard people argue that. There was a guy on Jane Snap's web page who made the comment, whether you have a somenos or whether you have holy, they're both pointing towards the tetragrammaton, because the holy is there, pointing towards a sacred name, where if you have it expanded, you can see the naked sacred name sort of thing. But either way, it's got the sacred name there. And I was like, yeah, I guess you got a point, but I'd rather have a somenos because it's explaining it to everyone, and we don't have those type of Hebrew superstitions on the name and things like that, and we usually expand all the nomen sacrum, but all the nomen sacrum forms. But yeah, so anyway,
this might be a gotcha moment for Nick to point out that there are actually some other reasons, although I think James is right that is an underlying reason. He has to explain why Hosias and not Erkomenos, and he doesn't say, well, it looks more similar, but although he doesn't say it, that does seem to be the reason underneath Beza's thinking, is that it's easier to go from Hosias to Esomenos, or vice versa, from Esomenos to Hosias is easier as a scribal error than from Esomenos to Hosias, or sorry, from Erkomenos to Hosias would be a harder scribal correction.
So I think I know what he's saying there. He's just saying if it had Erkomenos there, you can easily go to Esomenos rather than from Hosias to Esomenos. So
it seems as though it does seem like James White's reasoning might be correct, but it does not. So if Nick is saying just that it does not correspond to Beza's stated reasons, I have to agree. That's not the reason Beza stated. Then he says James White said that the King James Version reading of Revelation 16:5 arose from Theodore Beza's conjectural inundation and was unknown to history prior to that time, revealing White is totally ignorant of the evidence, which is just false. So it was unknown to history prior to that time.
Okay, so I'm just going to see what
16:5 arose from Theodore Beza's conjectural inundation and was unknown to history prior to that time, revealing White is totally ignorant of the evidence, which is just false. So it was.
Still didn't get it. Revealing White is. Oh, totally.
Revealing White is totally ignorant of the evidence, which is just false. So it was unknown to history prior to that time, remains true. There is no historical evidence of that reading, the substitution reading, before this time. Now, I know Nick, I'm going to point this out now because I'm sure that when Nick goes through this, he's going to point it out. He's going to say, as he says a lot, well, I'm not talking about the substitution, I'm just talking about the future form. And that's fine, except that the title of the book is about Beza and his expansion, and what Beza did is a substitution. He didn't just put in the future form, he did a substitution of the word for holy with the future form. So to defend what Beza did, and that's what James White's critical of, is not just the future form, but the substitution is what he's criticizing. So to rebut that, when you start going after James White, you have to go after what he was actually stating. He says, Tischendorf's notes confirm his James's assertion. He says that the Coptic and Ethiopic omit Hosius, but the King James Version reading is not to be found even here. James has a Solomon is not put in its place. And when he rebuked me, this was about that program, he specifically said that he was talking about the Greek here. So was White looking at for the Greek word of Solomonos in the Coptic Ethiopic he mentions here? Is he claiming that the Ethiopic needed Greek lettering here? Clearly, the Ethiopic, in fact, does indeed have the reading of shall be. He is either not understanding what Kopith actually means, or was ignorant of the reading of the Ethiopic, and be exposed that the Ethiopic does have it. He is now trying to claim the footnote is speaking of the Greek only, instead of saying he made a mistake. So I don't know where Nick's going with this. This seems a bit like, I don't know if you remember, a couple of episodes ago, I had talked about something and I had pointed out something being the Latin, that of course the Latin doesn't have a Solomonos, it just has a Latin word. And that seemed to bother Nick because he didn't mean, of course, that he didn't mean, and I was trying to imply that he did, but I must have sounded like I was. But he didn't mean, of course, that the Latin text had a foreign word pushed in.
Okay, so reading back through James White's material with the Cop Eighth, I guess because I was seeing so many things wrong, and I guess probably doing what I've accused TurretinFan of doing, going through and nitpicking every point and putting a cross against it. But then I had to pull back and go, okay, well, he said this correct, but he said this wrong. And so with the Cop Eighth thing, I actually assumed that he didn't know what Cop Eighth meant, and that he had thought it was from, I think it was Tregelles or Tischendorf, I think he writes in the notes. I should really go there. That it has the Cop Eighth there. And I was thinking, well, he doesn't know what Cop Eighth means. It means the Coptic and the Ethiopic. But then he's looking for, it says, he notes that Cop Eighth omits Hosios, but the KJV reading is not even found there, as the Somonos is not in its place. And I was thinking, I thought, well, he's actually thinking that it's some sort of Greek manuscript. And the thing is, because I've found it in the Ethiopic too, I'm like, he doesn't even know what the Ethiopic is. He hasn't looked it up, and, Hosky has said it's in the Ethiopic, sort of thing. So, and he's clearly talking about Hosios or Esomnos. Yeah, he's not talking about any other peripheral material. So, perhaps in that note, where I'm saying, well, James White doesn't even know what Cop Eighth means. Perhaps he did know what it meant. Perhaps he was relying too much on Tischendorf notes there, and maybe he missed what was really said in the Ethiopic. But so yeah, it's sort of like a whole another issue. But I probably would reword that, or even omit that section out of the bullet points of 30 or whatever I've got there.
In there. And similarly, Dr. White doesn't think that the Coptic or the Ethiopic have a Greek word as a foreign word in their text. But what Dr. White was saying is that the apparatus he was looking at was saying that the word corresponding to Hosios was, according to the apparatus, was not found in the Coptic or Ethiopic. That's a point I think that the apparatus there is mistaken about. There is a word, as Hoffman points out, there is actually a word there in the Ethiopic corresponding to Hosios. Now, or sorry, did I say? I don't know if I said Coptic there. I meant to say Ethiopic. I don't know
I think you said Hohozios, we actually meant Osomenos, but it's pretty hard when you're already an hour and 20 into a video, and this goes for 3 hours. Like I start doing that. I'll say Beza, I mean Erasmus. I'll say Osomenos, I mean Ozios, and you just start getting tired. And speaking of that, I've already gone for about 3 hours, so we'll shut this down pretty soon. But let's just continue to a point where we feel like we've completed something. We've gone to an impasse, and
well, the Coptic, I haven't investigated it. I can't speak to that point. It's quite possible that the Coptic has the same as the Ethiopic, and that there's actually some more link between the Coptic and the Ethiopic here. Perhaps that's an issue for another investigation at some point, but I haven't done that investigation and I'm not planning to do it right now. James White has said, so anyway, coming back to this. So no, I don't think Dr. White doesn't know what Coptic or Ethiopic means, and I don't think he meant to say that they should have a foreign word in them. Ultimately, I'm just confused by this point, which takes up about a quarter of the page. And the Ethiopic doesn't support Beza's, neither the Coptic nor the Ethiopic supports Beza's substitution. That's the key point. That's the point that, that's the key takeaway for this particular issue. James White said, likewise, Husky.
It does support the substitution. It mightn't support the whole entire verse of Revelation 16:5, but it does support the future form.
There's massive work on the text of the Apocalypse. Nowhere indicates the appearance of Beza's conjecture. And then Nick says, but Hoskier clearly has shalt be, but not in Greek. That's maybe true, but not relevant to what James White said. White has claimed many times that there's no evidence at all. So, to the extent when he says no evidence at all, of course, there's some evidence of some things that are out there. Evidence is evidence.
But see, the thing is, James White has often said there's just nothing. There's nothing at all, and in his book, he there was like 4 or 5 different caveats for that. It was like, no one's seen it in history. And the thing is, if Theodore Beza made it up in his mind, well, you can't have anyone before that having it. You know what I mean? And so that's why it's like, well, it's in the Ethiopic here. Obviously, he didn't make that up in his mind. And then it's like, well, it's part of the Tetragrammaton, part of I am, it's part of this, part of that. So that's the angle that I've been coming from is, look, James, you're wrong on all these points. And out of that has come my position. I'm going, okay, well, I think this now. But I think I've clearly demonstrated that James White really didn't know much about that. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that. I didn't know much about it.
Evidence. The question is the weight of that evidence, the significance of that evidence. So the fact that someone used the word asomenos before is some kind of evidence. It's not very strong evidence that it should be asomenos at 16:5 Revelation. But the fact that someone used it means it's a real Greek word. That someone used it of God means that someone could have used it of God at Revelation 16:5. But it doesn't mean that they did. So you see how the evidence, there's like very weak, very tiny, very insignificant evidence. And there's more direct and bigger evidence. So the evidence.
I mean, to me, the evidence that it's the name of Jehovah expanded, it's like case closed. How would you, if I said to any Hebrew, how would you expand the name of Jehovah? Oh, well, the past, present, and future. Okay. If I said to any Greek scholar, how would you expand, this expansion of the name of Jehovah, how would you translate that into Greek? Past, present, and future like this, and would probably include Eusomenos in there. Most likely. That's the etymology of I am. And then if I was to go into English, it would be, the past, present, and future, is and was and shall be, will be, or however you want to put that. And so to me, that's huge evidence. It's like, okay, the name of God expanded equals that reading, but then we're going to say, oh, there's no evidence for the reading. And then we've got evidence for that future part of the reading, which is the disputed part in the Ethiopic, in Betis of Libana, in Hamo, and in other documents. And it's see, the thing is, TurretinFan is wanting me to just forget the I am Jehovah link to this, where to me that's the main thing. The whole thing about the Ethiopic Betis and all that, that's almost like a side issue. But now I'm only fighting on that issue, and everything else is forgotten. It's like, well, the first half of my book is about Jehovah, I am, nomina sacra, all that sort of stuff. And so that's my main premise. And so I guess with going into my further studies on I am, Jehovah, and the Nehemiah Gordon material, that's just going to continually come out more and more and more. And so, because I'm finding books written around the time of 1611 and around the time of Beza that have this reading in Hebrew of the etymology of I am, the Haya Hova Yeh reading. And so I'm looking at Hebrew books where it appears like 50 times in the book, and I'm like, that's a lot of times. And so I'm going back and looking at these things, and so they're obviously talking about these things, talking about the name of God. I wish I could read Hebrew fluently, but I can't. And so I'm going to have to, Google Translate all this, and just rely on. But hopefully, I can go through some of Nehemiah Gordon stuff, and he's gone through some of this stuff, and because he's wanting to mostly look at the I am and Jehovah, and but I've come from the other angle. I'm mostly interested in Revelation 16:5, so it's going to make an interesting collision there, because we're sort of basically coming to exactly the same conclusions, but from completely different angles.
It may be more precise to just say that the evidence is paltry, where there's essentially no, or basically no, rather than just come out and say absolutely no, there's no evidence.
So internal evidence is absolutely huge for this verse.
But it's so little evidence that it hardly deserves to be mentioned. Things like versional evidence where a Greek word is being translated in a non-literal way by the versional translation, including Vidas of Labiana's non-literal translation of the Greek and the Ethiopics' non-literal translation of the Greek.
Well, it's only non-literal if you're saying all the Greek manuscripts have ever read is that, going back. So if you're putting that onto it and then going, well, we've got these versions, how did they get that reading from what we have in the majority today to that, instead of going, well, no, they probably had other readings, and these represent other readings that were earlier, that were in the Greek transmission. And so instead of looking at it that way, it's like, oh no, it doesn't really have the reading because it doesn't match up with what we got today. It's like, no, it's a wrong way to look at it. It's anachronistic.
Those two versional attestations that Nick is trying to point us towards don't point us towards Beza's substitution. They only point you towards the having a future reading there. And that's the reason for that being not enough. I've kind of gone over in a previous episode. I may come over it again later in this episode, God permitting, if we have time. Let's see. The last one of the James White points, James White said, quite simply, before Beza, no Christian had ever read the text the way the KJV has it today, which James White's exactly right on that point.
But James White's saying, shall be. TurretinFan's going, oh, the whole entire verse. No one's read it that way, and he's reading the material with different parameters. But like, you can't read through James White's material and say, well, he's talking about all this periphery stuff. He doesn't even mention it. Yes, he mentions it in other things and all the rest of it, but it's like here he's clearly not. Well, he mentioned, when I say other things, in his defense against me, he's bringing up all this other stuff, So TurretinFan's interested in all that, so am I. But for the case that I've made against James White and the case that I've made for the future form, he's reading something into James White that James White's not saying. He's reading into me something that I'm not saying. We're focusing on the future form here. If I do venture out and talk about the trade declaration and say, oh, this matches up with this and that, that's just, that's a bit of an aberration to the normal thing that I'm looking at, which is shall be. And I do make that very clear throughout the book.
And then Nick says, so White is either saying Jerome, Beatus, and many others are not Christians. That's not what James White is saying.
No, it is what he's saying. He was saying, it is pretty clear. He says, thankfully, there isn't the slightest doubt as to what John wrote here, and only misguided dedication to a human tradition would cause anyone to believe otherwise. Christians are people of truth, and I truly exhort any KJV advocate, any KJV only advocate, to seriously consider this text and to examine the documentation provided and to recognize King James onlyism for what it is, an unfounded tradition that flies in the face of truth. Conspiratorial thinking tends to see the facts in such a way as to support one's own preconceived notions. Once a person has adopted the idea that the modern versions are somehow in league with one another and get the KJV to hide God's truths, every instance of variation does it. So he goes through all that. But he says earlier, for the KJV only advocate, there is simply no way out of this problem. Does it say people? They're people of truth or something? Yeah, in his footnote, quite simply, before Beza, no Christian had ever seen the text the way that KJV has it today, and he's talking about Somenos and Osios. Okay, so he says, yeah, this is it. This is a united testimony of all relevant historical information. To deny this is to engage in the most egregious form of irrational thought. It is not faith. To deny reality, it is deception. So if these other people came to the same conclusion like Beza did and thought, oh, well, this is the name of I am, and maybe we should put this reading there, they were involved in the same type of deception. Beza was involved in deception. He's the one who did it. And so us just following their readings and thinking, well, they're well attested, someone's figured this all out. We're duped, but these guys, Beza was definitely being deceptive. He was a deceiver, and other people who have readings that sort of match in with Beza's, and they're departing from the Greek text and translating it in the future form when it shouldn't be there, they're deceivers as well. And so, how can you get around? He's saying it's not faith to deny reality; it's deception. He's like, Christians are people of truth. In other words, we're not behaving like Christians. We're not being honest. We're lying. We're lying to ourselves. We're being sucked in by deceivers. And to me, this is really heavy. And so I would just point out that anyone else in history who's done this type of thing as well is a great deceiver. And anyone who followed their readings was duped, like James White says. And that's all I'm saying.
None of them have the reading of Revelation 16:5 the way that the King James Version does. And many others are not Christians. That's not what he's saying. Or else he is totally ignorant about the evidence for this reading. So, no, the problem is Nick has overstated the strength of his evidence. There's a saying that, well, I'm not going to go down that path right now. The point is this. Jerome does not say that Revelation 16:5 has the same reading as what the King James Version has. The Addis of Leibniz reading of Revelation 16:5 is not what the King James Version has.
So this is where, I know TurretinFan's said, I'm going to not say this anymore this way or whatever. But to me, this is sort of like one of the flaws in TurretinFan's argumentation, because like if I was to debate a Catholic and I just said like absolutely everything I'd ever heard about the Roman Catholic Church on the internet, memes and all that, and I just mentioned all of them, they'd be looking at me like, well, there's a few of them that we can debate on, but everything else is not real and not true. And if you're just looking to put a cross against every argument, it sort of makes any argument that has any strength look the same as those ones that don't have any strength. Because to me, just to say, well, the Ethiopic has the future form in it, case closed, that's it, shut the door, and to deny that, and that's the thing, like TurretinFan, it's seemingly, it's like he's going, Ethiopic doesn't have Beza's reading. It's like, yes, it does. I'm not talking about any of the periphery stuff. It has Beza's reading it, you know. And so to deny that is actually to weaken any other strong point, because you're going to other things, and it's sort of like speaking about this as if it's just talking about the future form. We don't know. So you're talking about the future form, or you're talking about, you know, all the other stuff, or, you know, and then just to say, no, Beza's reading isn't there in the Ethiopic, it's not there in Beta Supply Band. It's sort of like, but you were saying, yeah, it does have the future form, and then it's like, oh, you've made up your own parameters, and so yeah, so I just sort of point that out by having a cross against everything. It can make it just look like you're just being the devil's advocate. And so there are some things that I felt that was happening, you know, with the etymology of Jehovah and things like that. It was really fought against in the first few videos. Like, you know, I actually had things, I was busy doing things, I had things on, but I was like, I have to make a video and sort this whole Havahaya thing out, because TurretinFan's saying that it's a massive error in my book. I go through it all, it's like, oh, it's not an error. And it's like, okay. And so, you know, some other things have been brought up. So it's not an error. It's just, you know, and then so it just sort of got to the point where it's like, he's everything he's going through. It's like, no, that's wrong. 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 And I'm like, you know, I'm sure if I wrote 1 + 1 = 2 on one page, it's like, oh, that's wrong too. Yep. And it's like that sort of discredits your other argumentation. Because if you're just going to say everything's wrong when some things are blatantly, obviously correct, then that comes against your argument. So anyway.
Neither is the Ethiopic or any of the others. None of them are what the King James Version has, which substitutes the word for Holy One with the word for shall be. That substitution is not present in any of those witnesses that we've seen. That substitution is not there. Now, Nick can say that's a straw man. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm claiming. Fine. Lovely. But if you're challenging what James White is saying, that is what James White is arguing, that Beza's change isn't supported by the evidence.
He was saying that the reading of Isomenos is not there, and the reading of Hosios is there. So, and his argument is that it was because the words were very similar. So he doesn't, in his book, he doesn't know everything that we know about Tetragrammaton, about Ethiopia. He thinks there's zero evidence before Beza. He thinks it's just made up out of Beza's mind. He just went, oh, that sounds pretty. They might make a song out of that one day. And he said things like that in his live sessions. Like he just made it sound, you know, poetic and rhythmic. And I've written some of those down in the book too. But sometimes it's like, oh, James White, let's not read through that, you know. But I have clearly documented what James White says about all this. So, and it's pretty clear that he's focused on the shall be reading and saying this shall be reading is not attested anywhere except for the mind of Beza. And so that's why it's like, I know it is attested in a lot of places before Beza. So how do you explain that? And he can't, you know. So he has to change his argument.
So why not just agree with James on that point, but nevertheless insist that the text is right? But let's continue on. So as we can see from the above points, White is completely wrong. I don't agree about that. I do think there's points that White could improve or refine his words. I've already pointed out where those are above. His research is flawed. His research was incomplete. But to suggest that it needs to be more complete would be true only if you found some evidence that was significantly contradicting his points. And that hasn't been produced. The evidence that's been produced is essentially that there's two weak versional attestations, which include a future verb form in the translation of the text at Revelation 16:5. That's not enough evidence to suggest that there's evidence of Beza's reading there. And I can in a future episode.
But James White said Beza made this reading up in his mind. So no one ever before had ever seen it. So that's the thing. It's not like he's leaving any wriggle room there. It's like it's you know, before Beza and after Beza, and that's it. Before Beza, a dearth, a desert. There's nothing there. After Beza, it's in the King James and all this. You know, that's where it started. That's where the seed started. And it's like, no, it started way back, you know, and that's the thing. A lot of the things that I point out that are sort of fought against, like I don't know why Nick keeps bringing up the before the 10th century sort of thing. Well, I bring that up because James White talks that way, and he says before the 10th century, do you realize that there's only this many manuscripts? And he'll bring that up to come against the TR position. So I'm using his same tactic and saying, well, okay, we've got 4 manuscripts. Wouldn't that warrant to go to the 7th century commentaries, 8th century commentaries? That Tychonius is like 380, and I know TurretinFan's said it's not really reflective of Tychonius's writings. That's how we get to Tychonius's writings, is through Beatus of Liban, and so that's how they're piecing together the commentary of Tychonius, is through Beatus. So it's like that's obviously a main witness, and so to get the reading of something that well attested, to get to that reading of a future form there, that would reflect that around Tychonius's time, in the commentary and in the text, there's a future form there, and that's going back before Jerome. It's quite interesting, and so we've got to think about these things. And
so I can maybe explain why more quickly, but I'll do what I can. Let's see. So Nick says the mountain of evidence, and I'm sorry, but there really isn't a mountain here. Really, when it comes right down to it,
if you're just looking at the Ethiopic and Beatus, and mountain of evidence is the name of I am, means past, present, future. That's the etymology of Jehovah, past, present, future, equals exactly what Revelation 16:5 has, okay, in the Textus Receptus. Unknown to James White. That's unknown. So that's a huge part of the puzzle, unknown to White, That's evidence. And so I know you like to the thing is, I've oftentimes pointed out that when I'm talking about 1 John 5:7, people don't want to go to where there's the solecism issue, because really that is like the sucker punch, that it's an absolute game changer when you know that, when you understand the concepts that are happening there. Because when you have verse 8, which has all these grammatical problems in it, when you have the solecism in 1 John 5:8 in the critical text and in the majority text, completely fixed by just putting the comma Johannium in it, how does it happen? How do you insert something that's apparently a marginal gloss that started from Cyprian? You insert it back in the text, and the text is fixed. It's like having a car not working, and it rolled down the hill, smashed into a tree, and it fixed the engine. It's like, that's a miracle, sort of thing. It's a miraculous reading. It just so happens to fix all the grammatical problems. Wouldn't you go look at that in reverse and go, well, perhaps the thing dropped out? that's why there's all these grammatical problems there, because when it's in there, there's none of those problems. And so that's the thing with Revelation 16:5. You have problems with the text. The Textus Receptus reading doesn't have any problems. If you didn't know about all this other stuff that's going on, you would just read it and go, yeah, that's fine. If you were to read the Greek, yep, that's fine. And so the thing is, it has to be known that James White is not acknowledging Tetragrammaton, I am, and even just looking at the other traded declarations. And just the fact that even my book, I go through so much stuff about the past, present, and future, all the way through. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever, etc. And it's like it would be warranted to have the future form there. It's missing. It's missing from the text. It's glaringly obvious, and I think I've made a very good. See, I'm the one who's made the case that this is a tetragrammaton related to I am, and it's the reading of Revelation 16:5 expanded. Okay, that's evidence. Are you? I would say to TurretinFan, do you deny that? Because you don't seem to bring it up. It's like, let's bring up the Ethiopic, let's bring up this other one, let's bring it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll put all that there. Just so happens to have all these future form readings there. It's like, okay, let's mention them. But my main case has been that this is a holy name. It's a sacred name. And so that's sort of forgotten. And I think the thing is, that's forgotten, and the manuscript thing is forgotten. And it just seems like we've got like say 6 major points. Okay, like imagine a wheel with 6 major little spots, or like little seats on it or whatever. You go to one and it's like, oh, okay, we're focusing on Beza's manuscript. Did he have oh no, it's probably a collation, it's probably this, probably that, and just dismiss it. So, okay, now we've dismissed that. Let's go to the next thing. Okay, the I am Jehovah thing, and it's not really that important. It's just, okay, it's coincidence sort of thing or whatever. Let's dismiss that. Okay, well, we've got the Ethiopic and we've got this versional evidence here, so let's dismiss that. And and just going through point by point, it's like I'm looking at all this together, and I'm not there going, well, the manuscript evidence is just that's all that we're looking at. Beza said he had an ancient manuscript. But the thing is, like TurretinFan's like, the Ethiopic, that's not strong evidence, so it's not really strong evidence against it. And it's like, well, it's strong evidence if you have Beza with a manuscript with the reading in it, if you have Beatus of Libana with the reading in it, if you have it's the name of Jehovah, it's the name of I am, it's expansion of that. You wouldn't have the name of Jehovah. Like, who in their right mind would get maybe Hitler? who in their right mind would just get the name of God and just chop it up like that? Okay, here's a delivery. We got the name of God. Yep, in the book of Revelation, here it's served up on a silver platter, and it's not the name of God. Why would you do that? Well, why would you do that to the name of God? And as we see in the Old Testament, they're substituting the name of God with the Holy One. It's sort of all this stuff is got to be put together. You can't just grab, it's one big cake. You can't just look at the flour and go, no, taste the flour. It's, it tastes disgusting. Grab a bit of sugar and you're eating the sugar. It's like, no. And just going through all the elements of you're putting it all together. And some of these you can't dismiss. You can't dismiss. Like, to me, I can't dismiss the fact that it's I am Jehovah. It's the same as Revelation 16:5. I can't dismiss that there are 4 triadic declarations that go before this reading. I can't dismiss that they have the past, present, future. Now, if you wriggle out of that with, oh, well, you know, we've got this one here that doesn't have the final part. Oh, well, you know, 4-8 has, you know, they're reversed, the present and the, oh, well, that's a way out of that. You know, it's just, I guess you can get out of anything. And I listen to a lot of Bart Ehrman stuff, and this is the type of thing where he's like, well, the virgin birth, no, and he would just attack absolutely every point all the way and not even have any wriggle room. It's just like, no, Peter was an illiterate guy who he had an amanuensis who was probably a Gnostic because he knew all about the Greek gods and mentioned Tartarus and all this sort of stuff. So he was a pagan, and you know, it's probably there's only about 5 books of the New Testament that are actually written by who it's said are written by, and all this sort of stuff. And you listen to that stuff and you go through it all, and all I'm saying is there are concrete things that you can't dismiss. How can you dismiss that this is the name of God? You can't. So why doesn't your text have the proper name of God there? And then we're going through the whole Yahweh thing. It's like, where is the Yahweh in any of the manuscripts? If you're going to say, okay, where's the evidence for this and for all that and the manuscripts and all that? And it's like, okay, show me where Yahweh is. I mean, we got Hebrew experts saying they're going through these manuscripts with a fine-tooth comb and they can't find Yahweh anyway. They're saying it comes from German sources, comes from English sources. It's all modern, but it's not in the manuscript evidence. And so no wonder there's been a dearth of people knowing about the Tetragrammaton I Am and its relationship to other verses in the Bible, like Revelation 16:5. Because people can't even get the basics of this issue lined up. And so to me, this is all evidence that is, you know, I am Jehovah, triadic declaration, past, present, and future in both. Very clear. Can't get around that. And then that's a little bit of a foundation. Then Beza's manuscript, a little bit more of a foundation. Going through triadic declarations, harmonization, a little bit more of a foundation. Beza's notes saying this, and that, a little bit more. And you build up and you're like, yeah, well, there's a really good case there. Where you've got nothing. It just open the door, it's just a desert. There's a zero. Not even a tetragrammaton or anything. So, okay. That's why I'm like, it's not really going to make for a good argumentation when the basics of this aren't even being acknowledged. So
the only evidence that's of any significance is the Ethiopic version and Beta stuff like that. All of the rest is the best you could say for almost all the rest of the evidence that's versional witnesses or patristic commentaries or like that or anything like that is that if the original reading was Revelation 16:5 as Beza had it, if that was the case, if that were the case, then it would be the case that some of these things are possible illusions. There's like 4 or 5 or more possible illusion categories of materials out there. But with all of those possible illusion materials, that has almost no weight to it. That's almost nothing. And the 2 versional witnesses are easily dismissed because they don't have the substitution. Because they're not strictly literal, they don't have the substitution, their weight is very insignificant. They're better seen as witnesses of the text of Nestle 28 plus the word Kai. So what about the, now he says, the nomina sacra point to Jehovah I am. This is just confusing. There is no nomina sacra in this text. Not in any of the manuscripts, in any of the versions was he pointing to a nomina sacra.
The original nomina sacra, Jehovah, in the theophoric names, mentioned by Hebrew guys like Davidson. Like, I've got his old Hebrew grammar here. This is old. This is like 1881. by Davis, 1880. And yeah, he's very clear that it's the name of Jehovah. It's related to Hava, to Haya. He's very clear on what he says. And it's like Hebrew experts, even Nehemiah Gordon, who's now recognized by the Academy. Now, I'm going to split soon, but what I'll do is I'll quickly get up the issue that Nehemiah Gordon has brought up with the Vaticanus. Okay, so Nehemiah Gordon, Vaticanus. Okay. I've written up a Twitter thread today on today's bombshell SBL papers on Codex Vaticanus's different inks, which I think is easy to follow because there are a lot of images, but I'll reproduce it here too. There's been a lot of talk of the bombshell papers, so it goes through that whole thing. So you have Nehemiah Gordon sitting here at the SBL conference, and he's talking about the inks that they've tested, and so that's very interesting. The apricot distigma, chocolate distigma, and Arabic numerals were written in cleaned inks, probably at the 16th century or later. So that would play into the whole thing of, perhaps Sepultiva or Bombacius. Someone has gone through and marked up the manuscript, but some of this could be guesswork as well, because it's like, okay, we've got this similar ink. Yeah, so all this information has to be filtered, so you have to look through it. But all I'm saying is that Nehemiah Gordon is the main guy behind all this. And so he is going to become pretty famous. Peter Gurry's talking about, everyone's going to be talking about it. Okay. And when I put my Jehovah link onto the ETC blog, when we were talking about, I think it was Revelation 16:5, or even Jehovah, I think it was. It seemed like no one really, it didn't get deleted. No one really commented much on it. It was just like, okay, because I think people have been following Nehemiah secretly, and they're like, he's actually right on this whole Jehovah thing. We've been duped for about 200 years. Let's get with the program, or else we're going to look like idiots. And I think that people are not really realizing the ultimate ramifications of this, which is Revelation 16:5. It all points to it. And so anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up. Nehemiah Gordon, his material. So maybe we'll just go for a tiny bit more, and then I'm going to hang it up.
He just made up the idea that the use of Hosias was somehow a nomen sacra. It's just made up by Nick. There's nothing just...
No, it's a logical conclusion that Theodore Beza in Revelation 1:4 says that the name of Jehovah is a sacred name with its etymology in I am. So as we have seen in that image that I've shut down for some reason, where is that? As we've seen here, the link between I am and Jehovah is very close, and this is just underlining it in English. I haven't really got that much information here, but I've kept it simple so people can go, yeah, that's very interesting. Is, was, and will be is Jehovah, and we can see this is clearly the reading of Revelation 16:5, and so we have to acknowledge that. And so, is this a sacred name? Beza says it is. It's a sacred name. And what did they used to do with the sacred name in the Old Testament? They put Holy One over it. They substituted it with the Holy One. So that type of methodology has to be acknowledged. At least acknowledge it. You know what I mean? Like, so anyway, I'm going to go more and more and more into that, and into the Hebrew, into the I am, because see, the thing is, I went to my I am page the other day. I didn't have any information. I just had a verse, and that was it. So if we go to Exodus 3:14, I actually just put that there the other day, and then yesterday I put the Dutch there. I didn't even have a picture. I just had that verse. So I haven't even started to go through the evidence of Exodus 3:14. But when I look at Nehemiah Gordon's stuff, that's all he's focusing on for years is Jehovah and I am. And it's like, he's done all the homework for me. And it's like, this is going to be a cakewalk. So because the thing is too, for TurretinFan to discredit me on this issue, he has to discredit Nehemiah. And Nehemiah's just gone, the snakes and ladders thing. He's just gotten on the ladder from being a kook guy who's like, the name's Jehovah, and critical text people are like, oh, you disgust me, to right at the top of the ladder, I'm examining Vaticanus, I'm in the Vatican. And people are like, who is this guy? And he's gone right to the top, and he's got very similar concepts to what I'm saying. And so TurretinFan will have to come against his concepts, because he does talk about it. He will say, where does the name I am appear? Where does the name Jehovah appear? It's in the Old Testament. It's here. And it's in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation. That's what he says. Where is that? Well, Triadic declarations. So that's going to be this is going to be a cakewalk, because I've and the thing is, how do you dismiss this? How do you dismiss it? You just have to sort of wave your hand and go, well, that doesn't exist either. The other stuff, the Ethiopic Beatus of Liban, that's all great, but it's like, to me, this is the main thing. And Beza having a manuscript with the Somenos on it is of importance too. So anyway, I'm looking at all the evidence. I feel I just feel like sometimes TurretinFan is looking at the evidence in complete isolation of all the other evidence. If you're going, okay, it's a tetragrammaton and it's I am, yep, that equals Revelation 16:5 in the Textus Receptus, and you've got that in your mind, then you're looking at the Ethiopic. You're going, yeah, okay. You instead, it's just like, let's forget all that. That's just unnecessary. It's clutter. Let's just look at the Ethiopic and just focusing on that. It's like, well, you're not going to see much. You're looking at it from the NA28 perspective and going, it's probably translating that exact same reading. It's like, oh, no. Anyway, that's my perspective, my point of view. And I think I'm going to leave it there. So God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us. And I'll see you another time.